Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 31 of Daffy's Roundtable. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about managing larger collections, tips to organize yourself, and how to not get overwhelmed. And today's guest is the perfect guest for this conversation, not because she has a huge collection, but because of how she handles this giant collection beautifully. And she managed to do so with two full-time jobs and four kids. No excuses, people. That's right, I'm talking about Jenn Haylor, also known as Jayhayjay, and today we're going to take a tour of her collection and learn all of her secrets. But before we do that, a huge thank you to the show's sponsor, Terra, for making this episode possible. Terra makes quality products for our pet reptiles to make them feel at home. And on that note, the Canadian Reptile Breeders Expo is next week on the 17th and 18th of September, and I will be there at the Terra booth from 10:30 to 12:30 on Sunday the 17th. So come say hi, let's take some pictures, let's chat about reptiles. It's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, without further ado, everybody please welcome my guest for this episode, the Queen, Jenn Haylor. Hi, Jenn.
Hello, buddy.
How are you?
Good.
Are you
Excited to be here?
this?
Yes.
I am very excited to do this as well.
You've been
Finally.
on me for months and months to do this, so I'm happy
I-
that we're actually doing it.
I have, and there's a good reason for it. I'm very excited to hear a lot of stories and a lot of awesome tips because Jenn is the queen
I'm full
of
of
reptile
tips.
keeping at this point, full of tips. But before we get into all that, can we start right at the beginning?
Yes.
So I want to hear how you originally first got into reptile keeping, your experiences breeding, and then I know you stopped for a bit, and then getting back into it.
Yeah.
So go.
So way back, not to date myself, but going way back in time, like 15 years ago, or longer than that, but 20 years ago, I got my first reptile. I was like in my 20s. Oh God, I just gave my age away. And I got a leopard gecko because I went to a store and I loved reptiles and I finally had my own apartment, and so I got a leopard gecko and I did not like him. I had that thing for like 20 years.
but you didn't like him.
No, everyone who knows me knows I'm not a leopard gecko person. But
That's true.
But that was my gateway reptile. And then, for a couple of years, I had an African fat tail and a leopard gecko. And from there, once I was in a bigger apartment, I started getting into crested geckos. And that was like, we're talking at a time where like northern gecko was like this tiny little breeder. There was anybody who's been in this hobby a long time will know Gecko Brothel, Doug Healy. These were the only people in Canada back then who were doing this. And
was Repashy available yet?
No. So no, we're talking about a time where some people were feeding baby food, and that was like the worst thing you could do. You'd go to the grocery store, you would buy the expired fruit. You would spend a weekend making fruit smoothies, freezing it in ice cubes for the next month. You would take out an ice cube, you'd add your calcium and your nutrients, and then you'd put it in. There was the first diet that actually came out was Clark's before Repashy. We had Clark's in Canada first. Okay. And I just remember in the hobby, it was this like, we shouldn't be using manufactured diets. Our homemade diets are better. And all of these preconceived notions. But so I went from, just a few little things to I was producing around 100 to 200 geckos a year. And, we used to go to the reptile shows in Mississauga, which were at that point held in a community center. There was like 20 vendors.
It was still the same company though, right?
It was still done by Port Credit and Grant back then. Yeah, they've been doing it forever. But it was just a very small community. Crested geckos hadn't taken off the way it had. We're talking about a time where like dart frogs were like coming into the hobby, and like dart frogs was like this, like, oh my God, how are you going to get this species? And we're talking about a time when like Miss King had first come out. And so you were hand misting everything. And then when Miss King was released, we were all like, oh, do we trust automation? And so again, this was a very different time in the hobby. It's like when I talk to my kids about before the internet, it's hard for people to imagine that this time existed.
Call it before Repashy or before technology, kind of.
Like it was a very simple time, and production was still, you could still produce a lot because crest geckos were still easy to breed, but like we're talking about like the first pinstripes being a big deal. Like everyone was trying to purchase these imported partial pins to create the first pinstripe, and like Whereas now, like a pin is like, man, whatever. Like,
Yeah, you wouldn't have even imagined lily whites or axanthics
no,
back
it
then or
was
anything
like
like that.
so far beyond like exotics and all of that. So it was a really fun time in the hobby. I enjoyed it. I did it. And I'm sure no one remembers the purple gecko, but that's how the name I did it under back then.
You were purple gecko.
I was a purple gecko.
Okay.
And then Rack Canada and Reptile Classifieds Canada was how we did everything on the internet. And then we had the shows, and it was a really, I mean, we're talking about before Facebook. There was
Yeah.
Facebook. Like
Yeah.
it was a really interesting time, and it was a lot of fun. And and then I got busy. I started working full time as a teacher, and I wanted to travel. We wanted to have kids, and so I got out of it. And I sold all the animals, most of them, some to Northern, some to Gecko Brothel Betty, who's now out of the hobby. And I didn't have anything for like 10 years, 15 years. And then I got back into it. My kids were looking at the old photo bucket photos of the reptile room from the day, and they were like, "What? Why don't we do this?" And so about 6 years ago, I think now.
Yeah, I think a little
Yeah.
bit more. Well, when we met, you already had. It was more than 6 years ago, and you already had a couple of dark frog species, and you
Yeah.
were starting to get the crested geckos going
Yeah.
again. And
I got into darts originally when I got back into the hobby, because I remembered all those years ago being like darts were this thing that everybody wanted to have and you couldn't get them. So I got into darts first and did that for a year or two, and then got back into cresteds because they are at the end of the day, they're the species I love the most. And it just, over the last few years, has kind of grown from there. I was doing a lot of plants, rare aroids and stuff like that. And then those two things, with all of these bioactive enclosures becoming a big thing. I mean, it's something I did 20 years ago that was like unheard of, and now it's a staple in the industry. So it was a really great time to mesh my love of plants back into that love of reptiles. And so it's just kind of turned into this.
It really is the way of keeping now is, or not the only way, but one of the many methods is plants, tropical, bioactive, is you kind of feel like people doing all the new cows, people doing the dart frogs, and all those people are going towards the bioactive, and it's awesome.
Even bearded dragons and leopard geckos, even more arid species, people are coming into like the store more and more and asking like, can I do this? How do I go bioactive? Anything can be kept bioactive, and it's just a matter of understanding the environment they're from. And so that was something, like I said, 20 years ago, I was keeping crested geckos. I had an 8-foot tall by 4 foot wide by 4 foot wide enclosure that I was housing some females and one male in, that was all planted. And it was just one of those things that back then no one was doing, right? So it was a hobby that hadn't developed yet. So when I got back into the hobby and saw all of these wonderful things that are happening, I was like, this is my time.
Finally, yeah. Okay. What are some things that, how do I phrase this question? What are some things that didn't exist in the hobby back then that now exist?
So Repashy is a big one.
Okay.
For sure. And it's funny because we say Repashy, we think crested gecko diet. Any manufactured diet didn't exist back then. Like Alan Repashy was obviously breeding crested geckos and doing this stuff, but like the whole line of Repashy, Pangea, these were just breeders. They weren't producing a product like this back then. I said Clark's earlier. So, and I mean, that extends beyond New Caledonian species to even just the aquatic products. And like, you know, when we're talking about like some of the different foods we have now, like the gelled products we can make for tadpoles and stuff, you weren't doing that back then. The idea of being able to go to a store and buy fruit fly cultures, like
that wasn't a thing.
That wasn't a thing. And like, if you like the feeding options, the worms, the types of crickets, the types of feeders we have now, like, you know, now the big thing in the States is it's roaches. And now those are starting to slowly creep into Canada.
Finally.
No pun. But like, really, it was crickets. It was crickets.
Yeah, and you just crickets.
And you know, there were no exotic pet stores. I mean, there were, but most pet stores were still very much like all the animals. You couldn't really support a single exotic pet store back then. So like realistically, you were having your cricket typically shipped to you. Like I would get my cricket shipped 5,000 at a time in boxes in the mail.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't like just go and buy them the same way. It hadn't taken off the hobby the way it has now. So feeding options for sure. the types of worms, the availability of crickets and other
There
feeders.
wasn't like silkworms and hornworms and all that.
Slowly it was coming in, but it wasn't the way it is now, where you
Okay.
can like even like PetSmart now carries these things, right?
true,
Like it
yeah.
was mealworms and crickets. Like it was kind
Yeah.
of what you were feeding. And crested geckos back then were cricket eaters. Like nobody wasn't
Yeah.
feeding crickets. Like you
Yeah.
were feeding fruit, but you were feeding and you had to gut load your crickets well because most of their nutrients were coming from that. Whereas now most of your nutrients are coming from the diet. Crickets are a treat for most people. My
Yeah.
animals I'll eat live.
I was gonna ask you. You still feed crickets to everybody?
I do, just because I did it for so many years, and that's where my experience lies, and I have a good response from it. I find they grow well, they grow proportionately. I've never had any issues with crickets. I see really natural behavior in them and how they hunt, so it's something I do. Obviously, I tell customers you don't have to. Now we have these options, but I like to stay as close to nature as I can.
And
I mean,
how often are you giving them, like, well, Repashy, Pangea, Zoomed, what do you use, and how often are you giving to them?
well, I'm a Repashy fan.
Okay. Yes.
You know this. That
Yes,
was
I
a
do.
loaded
Yeah.
question.
Yes, I do know this. Yes.
I have no problem with any of the diets. Realistically, they've all been formulated more or less based on what they need. I just find that with Repashy, I can mix in any fruit flavor with the bugs flavor
The
and
grub pie or whatever.
yeah, it's a higher protein. I find they grow well on it, and realistically, that's the least tasty diet you can give them. So when I
Yes.
start with gecko and I know it's going to a new home and they're like, "Well, I feed Pangea," I don't worry because they're
Because they're
always
gonna
going to
eat
have
it.
a good feeding response to Pangea. They're always going to switch. If I'm feeding Pangea and they want to feed Repashy, it's a bit harder to do the switch back because Pangea is sweeter. So and again, Repashy was the first one that came out, and
That's an interesting way of thinking about it, actually. Yeah,
yeah,
making it easier for their future homes.
like I've heard lots of people say I can't. Oh, this gecko was eating Pangea and I can't get it on Repashy. I've never had that issue, but I understand that for people getting them switched over is hard, so I stick to Repashy. But yeah,
I think it's more of a fear of, I can't have them go miss a meal or something. So they're
yes,
scared of having of like putting in the Repashy and them not eating that night or whatever it is. So
or
they're scared
they're
of
not
that
seeing the
issue.
whole bowl empty.
Or that,
Right.
yes,
You
yeah.
have an incredible feeding response and they're eating the whole bowl, and it's like, okay, but that's also not necessarily a good thing either. Like when they order a small fry or a large fry, I'm gonna eat it all. So
Yeah, it's true.
doesn't mean I
Depends on,
needed it.
yeah, how healthy do you want to be? That's true,
Exactly.
and a lot of geckos nowadays are very um big, let's say,
Yeah.
and big in the not healthy way.
And we
Um,
support that. Same with snakes and all.
yeah,
Like the bigger the the healthier they are, and that's not necessarily true.
it's
So
not
for
true.
me personally, I stick to Repashy. I get a good feeding response out of it. I've never had an issue, and I find any gecko I sell, they're very easily to get them over. So yeah, but
Awesome. Okay.
beyond, so that was like I think feeding options that have changed.
Yes. Oh yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Beyond feeding options, which is obviously the biggest one, is attitude. So, like we talked about, moving towards bioactive and
Yeah.
more natural. Well, it's kind of funny because we're moving away from their natural feeding, but we're
Mhm.
trying to move towards their more natural environment. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's interesting how, like, trying to recreate the environment more from the nature. So, going more to bioactive, again, even for things like bearded dragons and leopard geckos, which we used to keep on like crushed walnut or like
Yeah.
repti carpet, like, people trying to recreate, people understanding that a bearded dragon isn't a desert animal. It's something that still needs to have, a range of areas. This whole idea.
Something to burrow in. Something
Yeah.
to.
This
Yeah.
regulation being understood more now, and people understanding that, bigger enclosures are better in that you can create different zones for them, let them choose it. That is something that was not really discussed at all back then. The really funny thing in terms of what hasn't changed are enclosures. Like,
Yeah. Same ones.
it's
We're using exoterras and stuff like that.
yeah.
Then. Yeah.
Walmart used to do like 25% off on their exoterras, like every so often. I just go buy 10 like every year to add, and like
Yeah.
I often wonder if some of the ones you buy used are the exact same one I may have used 20 years ago.
20 years ago. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so little change. They changed the locking mechanism on the top about 5 or 6 years ago, but that's really it. Like it actually, I mean, there's Zoomed, there's what's the other one? Zilla,
And there's Thrive now, and
Thrive
there's a
now.
bunch of new ones. Yeah.
But it's funny how Exoterra still really, which I think is a credit to them.
Yes.
When
They're
you think
still
about the fact that
absolutely.
they
all
made
these years, and the product is still
yeah,
stands. It's still one of the most used enclosures. Absolutely, I agree.
they made a product that
Shout out Exoterra.
Terra.
Yeah, no,
Seriously,
100%.
they
Yeah,
made a product that has stood the test of time, and
yeah.
you
I
can.
actually have one that has a little date on the bottom of
Oh
like the
yeah,
year it was made, and it says 1998,
I'm not surprised at all.
and it's still
That might have
perfect. I
been
had to
mine.
get the screen replaced, but everything else it was working. That might have been one of yours. Yeah.
And they didn't sell out and try to make like we're gonna change the dimensions so that none of the old ones can be retrofitted. Like I
Yes.
can still take a lid from an old Exoterra and or from a new Exoterra if you just cut out the little notches around the inside
And
and
you
you can
put
put
it
a
in.
new
Yeah.
Exoterra lid on the old
Yeah.
tank. Like they didn't try to phase out their products to make them not serviceable anymore, which is great. And
And the standard sizes too, so that you're not, even if you're going from whatever tank to tank or new tank to old tank, you can just put it back right back on the racks. It's
exactly. You're not
very
having to
helpful.
redo, which I mean, as a company, I definitely respect because they could have changed everything and then you got to go and redo everything.
Yes.
So, and there's
Yeah.
obviously some really good options that are coming onto the market now, and Exoterra is keeping up and trying like their new frog line, the
Yeah.
frog
Frogs and Co. Yeah.
and bottom, like that's all great.
Yeah.
But they're staying true to their sizing and making it that you can still use your other pieces and put it all
Yeah.
together. So I
And
find
branding, recognize, you can still tell it's an Exoterra from
yeah,
anywhere you
like
look at it. Yeah.
just no looking at it. So I
Yeah.
have a it's
100%.
interesting how the enclosures really haven't changed that much. Automation is definitely the big one. Miss King came out about halfway through my original journey in reptiles. And again, it's funny because when it came out, everyone's like, this is a product. And then here we are 20 years later, and it's
Product.
still the one to go with. You know, there's
Yeah.
other options on there. I mean, Exoterra
Yeah.
did make a misting system,
The
but
monsoon. Yeah.
the monsoon, which is great if you have, one or two tanks, but
But when you go big, you need the misking.
the Miss King
Yeah.
is still there. I've never had a
Yeah.
failure with a Miss King. I like you can buy a used Miss King pump and it works. Like
Yeah, I know you're right. I've
yeah,
from experience, I agree. I've only had mine for I think 3 years now running, but
yeah,
everyone else's I've seen, I've spoken to, they've been like, yeah, I've had mine up for 12 years
yeah.
now, no problem.
And when they came
It's
out, I
awesome.
remember us all standing around the expos watching demonstration, like just trying to fathom in our minds that all 50 tanks could be misted
At once.
at
Yeah,
once. Like, because
yeah,
when you were hand misting was a 2-hour job
yeah.
every day. Like, it was such an like,
But
holy
still saying like, do we trust automation?
yes, at the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
time.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's also the investment. People invest in the hobby now much more heavily.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't the same back then. Like you didn't the idea of the reptile room, which has become such a like concept for us now.
Yes.
It didn't exist back. I had a reptile room, but I didn't think of it the same way as I think of this reptile room. The
It was
aesthetic.
just a room in the house that you had your reptiles in.
Yeah, it was a functional room. It wasn't necessarily a
Yeah,
room now,
yeah,
whereas now it really is. Like the idea of investing in really good misting products, investing, in really well done enclosures. This idea of, having tutorials on how to escape, like the idea escaping. I don't think scaping
was a thing.
I don't ever remember using the term I'm scaping. I'm setting up a tank, I think is what I would have said. And people can correct me if I'm wrong.
Hmm.
But it just wasn't the same way in the hobby that the art form of it wasn't the same as it is now. Like there's something about picking up all your plants and picking up your soil and picking your cork and your branches and going home and like,
Sitting there for hours just playing with
yeah,
the tank, and it's you're right. I think before, the hobby concept was more keeping the animals and kind of understanding how they are, how keeping them alive, keeping them, doing well.
yeah,
And now that we understand that with most of the animals, it's like, how do we advance from here? How do we
yeah.
What's
Next
the
time.
next step? Yeah, exactly. And I
Yeah.
think we're finally getting, well, hopefully finally getting to that next step.
And we were still dealing with a lot more like metabolic bone disease and like we were still learning a lot of that stuff, like, especially when you're homemaking your own diets. Like, everyone was always sharing how much calcium, how much vitamins they're putting in. Like those were still things we were concerned about because we were still learning how to properly keep these animals healthy. Whereas now that's kind of been cut out. All of that science is kind of gone. So
Yeah.
now we're able to start advancing into, do they need UV? Do they not need UV? Let's play with this and see if
Will
it
they
makes
benefit more with it?
yeah. Now we're able to look at, do they need different zones? Do they need a bigger drop at night, less of a drop at night? Like I can't remember obsessing over when I misted back then.
Yeah.
Whereas
And now
now,
you're like, is it better to miss at night? Is it better?
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go a
Yeah.
week and I'll do like, do I do a 45-second mist here and a minute there, or do I invert that? Whereas like back then it was like you're just holding the button until you're tired of holding the button, and then you move to the next one.
You're like, yeah, looks enough moisture on the glass, we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Isopods. Like
Yeah.
isopods were not
Were
a
isopod a thing? Yeah, were they a thing at
no,
all?
they were
No.
not a thing back then. Like, I mean, I'm trying to think if there were springtails. I mean, you had springtails and plants, but I don't think anybody back then, again, correct me if I'm wrong, was culturing. Like I was keeping bioactive setups and I wasn't adding bugs to it.
They
Like, I
just
mean,
happened to
naturally
show
it would
up.
happen. Yeah, naturally it would happen. But like the idea that you could just go and buy a culture of springtails or like, dwarf whites, that wasn't, I remember when I got back into the hobby with the dart frogs, that was one of the things that really got me, was the whole, like, all of these organisms existing in this setup that are keeping it going. Like it was a new concept that just wasn't adopted yet, at least not like as widely as it is now. So, people were keeping, most crested geckos were kept with paper towel. That was
Right.
kind of the standard, was paper towel on the bottom, and you changed your paper towel out every week. When I was like, this is like a lot of work. So that's why I went to soil mix. And because I've always been a plant person, I knew what soil mix to use. But like people were like, oh, impaction risks and choking risks. And like it was, sterile, 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 keep everything clean. If you can't boil everything, then it can't be clean. And whereas now we've come to appreciate all of these microorganisms that do the work for us and actually create a better environment. So it's mind blowing to me that we have all of this available to us that we just didn't back then. That just makes the whole hobby just more enriching.
That much better.
That much better. Yeah. It's like
100%.
we haven't just expanded it. We've taken it from this to like this. Like it's
and it's still growing. Now it's almost like yearly new products are coming out, new things.
Exponentially. Like it's phenomenal.
Crazy.
It's phenomenal. Yeah.
And of course, we're so happy about it.
Yes. Always.
Yes.
When you love it, when you're here because you love it, then this stuff excites you. Like when you're not in it because you want to make it your full-time job, when you're doing it because it's where you want your full-time job's money to go, then it's really, that's where the passion really can come in. So yeah.
Okay, so we already said that when you came back into the hobby, you were keeping dart frogs and you slowly started breeding crested geckos. From there and now, what are you currently keeping? What are you working with? I know it's many, many, many species. So I don't know how you want to group them or put them together, but yeah, what are you currently keeping?
So when I'm getting into
there had to be a sigh before the list.
There always is. Because it's hard. People are like, so what do you specialize in? Well, that's complicated. Everything. Well, everything is kind of the answer, but very specifically what parts of everything. So for me, coming back into the hobby, dart frogs was my gateway back in, because it was one of these things where it was like back then, you had blue dart frogs and we called them blue poison dart frogs. And I don't think we even knew back then that they weren't anymore.
They weren't as, oh really? Okay, yeah, they weren't Azuris at that point either.
No,
they were a different.
First?
Sorry?
What was the first that came back in? I just
no, they were them, but they weren't even scientifically described as Azuris. I believe they were considered a different species.
I just remember seeing blue ones first at the shows, and and they were so expensive, and everyone was like, "They're so hard to keep alive." And so,
do you remember roughly how much they were?
Hundreds, and we're talking hundreds, and we're talking hundreds back then. Keeping in mind, a low-end crested gecko back then was $150.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's like probably $200-300 now. So like nothing was being produced on the level it is now. And so everything was more expensive. Like, so realistically, 100 Zen is like probably 500 now, but it's hard to compare because everything was more expensive back then.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so I got back into dart frogs right away. At one point, I was at like 20 different species of dart frogs, and really enjoyed it. It's how I really got good at doing bioactives and delving into scaping and creating these little habitats. And then, as you remember, I messaged you one day. Well, no, then I got a lychee, because even lychees and chewies and Sarahs back then were like, again, like there were no urodactylides. They weren't even here yet, and it was like. Chewies came in, Sarah slowly, a couple, I think Northern Gecko got a pair, and then lychees were the big thing. Northern Gecko got the first pair of lychees, and everyone was like, "Oh my god!" Like they were like $4,000 or $5,000,
Yeah.
and it
Of
was
course.
just. I remember seeing Mark's lychees the first time and just being just. My mind was blown when I saw them because the idea of this
Giant gecko.
gecko, this meat, it
Yeah.
was so meaty.
And wrinkles.
It was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So when I got back in, I was like, I need a lychee because it was like a new cow I hadn't had.
But you were keeping cresties and gargs and
I got a lychee first.
no, before you left the hobby the first
Before I
time.
left the hobby, I was doing gargs and chewies and cresties. Yeah.
Okay,
I
cool.
was doing all the things I could get my hands on for less than $2,000.
Yeah, makes sense.
You know, even the Sarahs back then were like $2,000. Like I think I had one that I sold right before I got out, and I had a breeding pair of chewies. But it was only mainland at that point. But yeah, so I got from my darts, I got my lychee Band-Aid, who I still have.
Yes.
And then I remember I messaged you one day, and I was like, I'm gonna get a cresty again. I miss them.
Yes.
And then from there, one cresty turned into, I don't know, 100 and something now.
Yeah, I mean, like probably most of the tanks behind you on that side are
actually
cresties.
This is not cresties, but if you look over
On that side, yeah.
Mostly cresties.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got heavily back into the cresties, and then playing the new cow game because that's where my heart always lies. Gargs, you know, some of the colors and gargs, they were all brown. Same with the chewies, they were all brown back then. So like being able to buy these red gargs and these pink chewies, and it was just mind blowing. The collared Sarahs. So I really explored all the different new cows and Urodactylides because they were the new one. So I ended up getting all the species of Urodactylides that are available.
You have the Velarde, the Agricolae, and the
Occidentalitis and the Symmetricus. Yeah.
Oh, you have all four?
Yeah. I don't know if I pronounced the names all right though.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, so I ended up getting all of them, and I probably have around 30 Urodactylides right now. And then from there, I started to get into snakes, sand boas, which are the only snakes I produce.
I just want to say at this point, before you got snakes, you were saying you would never get snakes.
Never.
Well. Yes, you never get snakes.
When I would vent at the shows 20 years ago, Grant would always go and stick me next to one of the ball python because he tried to like split the people up, you know, geckos, lizards, snakes. And I would always end up next to the ball python breeders. And I'd just be like, why? I can't stand them. So when my daughter said she wanted a snake, and I was like, no snakes. And she said, why? And I said, because they're scary. I don't like them. They're creepy. You know, they eat big giant rats, and I'm a fuzzy person. I like my mammals too. So, and then she found sand boas, and she came to me, and literally sand boas are, if you ask a child to draw a picture of a snake, they draw a sand boa. They've never seen one, but that's what they draw.
That's what they imagine. Yeah.
It's basically a long tube with googly eyes, and they don't bite, and they're very just goofy. And how do you say no to that? Like,
you're like, oh yeah.
You can't. So we ended up getting one of those. And then because, again, that passion is sparked, I ended up getting a few of those. And now I breed them.
And you have 100 of them.
Well, no, 20. But it's not. They haven't. My females haven't had their babies yet. So we're still only at 20.
We're getting to 100.
We'll be there by the end of the breeding season.
Yeah. Or by the end of this episode. Who knows?
Yeah. Who knows? I'll keep my eye on them.
Yeah.
So snakes, just the sand boas. And then from there, I really kind of paused for a second and tried to think about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go from that. And coming from a different time in the hobby where the goal really was to learn and to make animals available. And that's where we were coming with cresteds, was that, you know, they weren't available the way they are now. We were like, these are incredible pets. We need to make them available. Like these should be available in pet stores when people are going to
breed as many as you can.
Yeah, we were like, people shouldn't necessarily just be going into the pet store and buying a leopard gecko or a ball python because those are the two things. Oh, is it daytime now?
It is daytime now, but I think we're gonna make it nighttime again, just so that it looks better on the podcast. There we go.
There we go. It's nighttime again.
Yes.
Your animals are like, what?
It's just lightning. It's just lightning.
Maybe you'll get some breeding behavior.
Yeah, who knows? It's a thunderstorm.
So going back to that mindset of like, what do we want to make available for people? What pet is going to make people happy, right? What do we want to produce that people are going to buy and keep for 15 years? So that's kind of the mindset I started going into. So then I started looking at skinks and, stuff that is really wild caught for the most part and is underappreciated and cheap because it's wild caught. But my light just turned off. Wow,
In sync.
we're in sync. It's not oh, there we go. So so then I got into skinks a little bit and swifts, so the emerald swifts, the which are hugely underappreciated.
So kind of keeping that same mentality of what animals aren't available and are good pets, let's make
Yeah.
them available.
And which animals, second, third, fourth generation captive bred are going to be really wonderful pets versus, the wild caught specimens that we're making our judgments based on.
Yeah.
So the Emerald Swifts were a really big one. This was my first successful year breeding them, and just being able to show people the difference between a wild caught Emerald Swift and a captive bred Emerald Swift that will climb onto your hand. Like, it's mind blowing when we have this animal that's look, don't touch. So I got into those. I got into obviously the emerald tree skinks, something that a wild caught specimen that used to cost us $40, $30. And, we thought their lifespan was a few years because they would die quickly.
Mhm.
And now we know these things live a good amount of time. They can be very docile and fun to keep. This is, not a look, don't touch species. Getting into those.
Go check out my episode last week with Avery. My female actually came out and sat with us on the podcast.
Oh, I believe it.
And she was like, I was just handling her for a good 10 minutes while we were talking, and they're super. So
you
like you said,
told me, you were the first one that said, because I was like, all right, what do I like? I asked people, like, what do you think the hobby needs? And you were like, this is going to be a big thing, and the videos I've seen are really cool. And one thing I am really good at is when I get set on something, I tend to find it.
Yes.
I get hyper focused.
Jen is the sourcing queen. If you can't find an animal in Ottawa or even in Canada, Jen will find it for you in
will.
like
if
3
I have
hours.
To import it, I will import it. I will do what I have to do to get it, and I get very focused. So, I went from having one male emerald tree skink I happened upon to having I think I have 8 females right now and 3 males.
And 100 babies. We're just gonna stick with the number 100 and 100 babies.
Well, there's always 100. I like that number. It's profitable.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the emerald tree skinks, and then this year in particular, I've in the last 14 to 18 months, I've really branched out again in terms of what brings me joy. So bearded dragons, I did do bearded dragons briefly before I bred just regular bearded dragons for a little bit 15, 20 years ago. And the size and the smell bothered me. So really getting focused on this is not necessarily, this large dragon is not necessarily something that I would recommend to a family with young kids to take on, but the Rankin, so a dwarf bearded dragon, that idea really got me. So I got into those guys to breed them because this is something we can offer. When I sell an animal, I want to know that 5 years from now, you still are enjoying that animal. So I want to produce things that you're going to love and that you're going to want to keep, and not just, and I know we have to rehome animals, it happens, but I would like to set my animals up for success. So looking at things like the Rankin's dragons are really important. So it's something I've taken on this year. And then the spiders.
Yes, the spiders and the scorps.
The scorps
and the spiders.
Yeah. So I've always been terrified of spiders. And again, spiders were not at shows 20 years ago. You had just your curly hairs that were typically out and about, and that was it. So I really had a lot of fun going to Transworld Canada and Montreal and just learning about, what's available, connecting with people who were in the spider industry, 15 years ago as well, who are coming back in going, this is completely changed. This is nothing. Yeah. We had 3 options and now we have hundreds, and we've learned so much. And how you kept a tarantula 15 years ago was standard across the board. It was a critter keeper.
Depending on whatever species it was
all the same. We just didn't know. And now we have detailed care sheets for each type, and it's such a fun, there's so much to learn and explore. And I don't breed any of my tarantulas. I have around 30 or so. I don't breed them. I don't plan to, but it's a labor of love. It's something, and I love helping.
And it's not much of a labor either.
It really
is compared to the other species you're keeping. Tarantulas
isn't. Yeah. It's full. It's all reward. It's all reward for very little work. So
and it's crazy how there's different niches now in the hobby, and each niche is taking and expanding in their own niche, and everything's becoming bigger and bigger. And it's so the spiders you're saying, and the dart frogs wasn't a thing, and it's crazy.
The growth is incredible, and from spider scorpions.
Scorpions, yes.
Scorpions I always was interested in, but again,
Mhm.
back then you had very little option. So getting into different scorpions, the whip scorpions have been really fun to keep. And isopods, you can't see them on camera, but lots and lots of isopods. Again, isopods are so much fun because you can sell a culture here and there as you want, and you can use them. They're like a renewable resource that you can continually use.
I use them for many, many things, and I whenever I'm traveling or whatever and leaving for a day or two, I'll put some extra isopods in for the dragons to eat or whatever. Like they're useful. Yeah.
And again, it's back to those food options I mentioned earlier. Like it was like crickets or mealworms. Crickets or mealworms. Like now, and people are like, "Oh, are they going to eat the isopods?" Yeah, they might. That's a good thing.
Yeah,
Like,
why not? Yeah.
why not? If they want to eat it, then you're raising them, you're feeding them. That's the cleanest, most like trustable food source you can give them.
Yeah.
So the isopods were another one that I really have enjoyed getting into. So, I mean, overall, I'm at the point now where it's snakes being sand boas. I'm expanding a little bit this year into maybe some cricket eaters. I'd like to look at other smaller snakes. I have a hard time. I think, okay, we're gonna have to go without that. It doesn't want to play. I have a hard time selling ball pythons. I think ball pythons are wonderful, but I think a lot of people who buy them don't necessarily know what they're signing up for, the size of enclosure they're going to need, the care they're going to need.
Yeah, they're so popular that everybody wants a ball python without actually knowing what it
They've
takes.
been around the longest.
Yeah, that's
really what it is. They've been around the longest, so it's just what people go to. So I guess why I'm so passionate with the sand boa is because when people are like, "What snake should I get for my kid?" Well, you shouldn't get any snake for your kid. If you're buying a reptile, you're buying a family pet. But if you are looking for a good family pet, a sand boa is most likely it. And so I'm trying this year to expand in a bit more into looking at other smaller snakes that make really good, family pets that are easy to keep, and that, cricket eaters are something that we haven't really looked at too much in the hobby. Most of the species are just starting to come in and be hopefully captive bred. And it's something that, people can easily get food for, easily keep, and should be really enjoyable for people to have.
Can we give a little sneak peek here?
Of?
You're saying you're considering getting into cricket eaters. Is that the truth? Is it a consideration, or
I may have already
something already put on paper? Yeah. Okay. If you could talk about that, that would be awesome.
We're gonna have to do an after the expo show. What did we bring home?
Okay, just to give people clarity, you guys will be hearing this September 10th, or I'll be releasing this September 10th. 7 days after this is released, me and Jen will both be, and loads of other people from Ottawa are also driving up with us. We're gonna all be at the CRBE for 2 days, and it's and Jen has been buying animals for it to pick up at the CRBE for like 6 months.
Yes.
So when she says she's considering things, she means she doesn't want to admit that she already owns them until after she picks them up. Just to clarify.
Watching this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. As I said earlier, when I get onto something, that's it. Like, I'm all in. So yeah.
Stubborn in a good way.
Stubborn in a good way. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about those.
We'll wait till after.
We'll wait till after the expo. Okay.
Until I know what I'm doing.
Okay.
Again.
All right. That's fair.
I think that plays into a lot of this is that you shouldn't be afraid to do your research, find out what you want to keep, and try it. And it's something that kind of, I think often back to, I didn't mention Mo, my Uromastyx earlier. I had a rescued Uromastyx for over 20 years. Yeah. He was with me even when I was out of reptiles. Mo stayed with me, and so did the leopard gecko. But it's funny because I feel like back then you bought an animal and you felt married to it. Like you felt like you had made this lifetime commitment. And it's important, I think, to go into all pet ownership that way.
Considering that this is going to be with you for a long time.
Yeah. But when you're breeding, when you're taking on a reptile room, when it's not just a pet sitting in the corner of your bedroom anymore, I think you have to be willing to do your research and say, this animal is getting me excited because it speaks to my passion. Do your research, find out how to keep it that way. Learn how to keep it better, right? Keeping that animal, learning how to continue to push the hobby along to do it maybe even better and contribute back to the hobby. And you might end up with species that you don't want to breed. Like I ended up thinking I was going to breed leeches, and I don't want to breed leeches. It doesn't speak to me, and that's okay, right? Like, I had 20 species of dart frogs at one point. I have maybe 7 or 8 now. Like
And it
that,
doesn't mean you're neglecting those animals. You're finding good, responsible
you're
homes for them.
selling
You're
them.
rehoming them. You're selling them, and you're focusing on things that you know you can do better
Yeah,
without the extra distractions. Yeah,
exactly. You're just you're learning, you're incorporating all this knowledge into who you are as a keeper. And there's some species that I just know I'll always have. I'm always going to have crested geckos. The market can tank and not exist anymore, and I'm always going to have crested geckos just because the
yeah.
joy they bring me. I'm always going to have sand boas. I'm always going to have some dart frogs. Like, these are things I know, but I'm willing to experiment in other areas to find out, you know, maybe I will decide to bring something in and I will be able to work with it and learn something that helps the hobby. Like the experience I've had with the emerald tree skinks. If I
Yeah.
didn't, I might have gotten them in and just not had any love for them, and then rehomed them with a breeder who was going to do wonderful things.
That's the thing.
They spoke to me, and
Yeah.
I'm proud of what I've learned about it. And I have people message me all the time asking me, like, how are you doing this? How are you having success? Like, it's same with the emerald swifts. Like, it's really, it's a
When
sense
I
of,
first heard about emerald swifts, I was told there's no way you can handle them. They're a look and watch only pet, and they're too fast.
Mhm.
And I've actually seen you handle yours. So
You've seen them,
yeah,
right? Like,
100%. Yeah.
and I mean, these are not like, I'm not grabbing them, and like, they're just in the right setup. They have the right conditions. They have, like, I've learned about who they are as a species, and I'm able to pass that knowledge back on to other people, to the point where one of my followers is now going to be breeding them. Like,
Yeah.
that is what fires me up, right? Like,
Yes.
now they're going to be breeding them. So
Advancing the hobby.
yes, like, can you imagine a day when there's no wild caught emerald swifts anymore? No, like that's what we want to be
Yeah,
doing.
it's the same thing. Like there are species that we need to be bringing in wild caught because there's just not enough of them in the hobby, and we're hopefully not affecting the wild population too much. But now that these species are in the hobby, we need people to be focusing on them, breeding them, so we can cut out the wild caught
Yeah.
imports. But then also there's the consideration of how are we affecting the wild population when we stop collecting from the
Like
wild as well,
collecting.
right? Like what Dave Kaufman was saying about the ball pythons in Africa.
Okay.
So there's a lot to consider. There's a lot to consider there, but definitely finding these species, especially if the species is endangered in the wild,
Yeah.
and breeding them is definitely where the hobby needs to
And
be moving towards.
stopping the
I agree.
farm breeding, because
Hmm.
wild caught is a really broad term.
Term, yeah, hundred
People
percent,
imagine somebody going out, is it what it's what it used to be. It was someone going out with a net and catching. And there's still lots of species, like any of the
and
wild.
not even knowing what they're catching.
Yeah, a lot of the
Hmm.
whip scorps, unidentified species was something
Hmm.
you saw all the time 20 years ago on something.
Yeah,
What is it? It's an unidentified species. It wasn't unidentified. It was wild caught, and whoever caught it just didn't know what it was yet.
yeah,
Like,
exactly, yeah,
and there's still stuff like that, like whip scorpions. If you're buying a wild caught whip scorpion, it was likely field caught because it's easy to do. But now we've gone really into farm breeding.
yes,
So a lot of things like the emerald tree skinks that we see coming in wild caught typically aren't caught off a tree.
no,
They're in a enclosed area that has been wild ones have been repopulated into so that they can breed in those ideal conditions, and then they take the babies. But
yes,
even that, like,
or
why,
collect the eggs and
or collect,
incubate them
yeah.
and stuff. Yeah,
But it makes so much more sense for us to be doing this within Canada, so that's not necessary, and within North America, so that,
and you're reducing the stress of the animals being shipped as well.
and the
Yeah.
quality of the animals. Like, when I send
Mhm.
pictures of my baby emerald tree skinks to people, like, I'm always having to send videos to people because they're just like, I don't believe it. Like, you have to see. I just posted a reel today just to show people, like, and when people get them shipped and they show up and they're like, they're jumping on my arm. And I'm like, I told you,
Yeah.
wild caught versus captive bred. And I have some of my wild caught specimens now that are very sweet and tame, but it's taken so much work. Whereas the captive bred babies have always been kept in ideal conditions. They've never had to worry about food. They're used to my hands going into the tank. Like, it creates a different, it creates a domesticated animal, which is what we should be selling. We shouldn't be selling wild animals that need to live in the wild.
Yeah,
It,
that
it
want nothing to do with you and are always hiding, and
yeah.
it also takes people out of the hobby, right? People aren't enjoying the hiding. I'm staring at an empty cage. What's the point of this? I'd rather get a hamster or a dog or something like
And
that. It's
then
like, no, you're just missing out because that animal is not
not happy.
interacting with you. Yeah,
Yeah.
not happy, not interacting with you. Like,
It's
yeah,
not domesticated. It's not,
hmm,
it would rather be in the wild, whereas the
right.
captive ones, and you can't take, I mean, there's a level of instinct, but you can't take an animal that's had to hunt for food its whole life and has gone hungry at certain times. Like, that's a natural
Yeah,
process. put it in a cage and
and
it's
constantly have food.
yeah, it's a shift. I don't want to say an emotional shift because people will argue that reptiles are emotional. I will argue that emerald tree skinks are, but anyways,
I think all of them are. I definitely think
they're
that
brilliant.
reptiles are I can't even say the word sentient.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Sentient. I think
Well,
that's
not,
the right word.
I mean, crested geckos. All crested geckos in the world share one brain cell.
Yeah.
So because there's so many crested geckos now, that's why they get dumber and dumber because
I
now
love that share one brain.
has to get shared between every time a new crested gecko is born, all crested geckos get dumber.
Yeah, it's just it gets added up and divided again
Yeah,
by
they
that one.
all
Yeah.
have that one brain cell has more rounds to make. And it's funny, like when I'm selling emerald tree skinks and people are like, like, can I put it in a big cage? And I'm like, yes, you can put baby emerald tree skinks in an adult sized cage. Will they find their food? Yes.
Yes.
And I had one of the person who bought them off me said, it's funny because I was feeding a waxworm and the waxworm fell to the ground and the tree skink went down and got the waxworm. Whereas the crested gecko would go, well, I guess it left time and space. It no longer exists in our
It no longer exists. Yes.
Or it would be like,
true.
what am I doing?
That's true. The cricket jumps away. What cricket?
What?
Yeah.
Oh, look, we're patchy.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't move.
It doesn't move. It's always there.
Yeah. No,
But
that's true.
I just you can't take an animal that has that in them and expect the same thing you can from a captive bred animal. So while I am in full support of wild caught to establish captive bred populations, I think as keepers, we really need to be thinking outside of the box and go, what species should I be getting? What species do I think could spark my attention and get me, all fired up and that I could make a difference with in the hobby versus, what species can make me the most amount of money, which is important too, because this costs a lot of money to maintain.
Yeah.
But, if you don't have, and again, in the 20 years I've been doing this, I've come and gone with seen different people come and go. And it's funny because like Mark and I were talking last year from Northern Gecko and saying like everybody's gone. Like we were trying to remember, there was nobody left who was doing crested geckos back then that we could think of who's still doing it now in this area, in the States.
Just you and him.
But yeah, it was like we couldn't think of anybody else who's still doing it because people, and again, I left the hobby too, so I understand. But like, if you don't have that passion, it's really hard. If you're doing it only for money, it's very, very hard to stay with it because to do it and to be successful in it, and successful to me doesn't mean making the most money. Successful means keeping a really happy, healthy collection that brings you joy.
Yes.
It's hard. It's a lot of work. So you really do need to find those species that'll continue to spark that joy. And that means experimenting. And that only pushes the hobby forward.
Awesome. I think you've listed most of the species you keep, but there's one that you didn't list that I also would like to touch on because they're also one of my favorites in your collection. And those are the scorpion geckos.
Ah, yes. So the viper geckos.
It's viper geckos. Sorry, the viper geckos. Yes, my bad. Yes.
Viper
How dare you forget them?
Yeah,
they're adorable. They're cute.
And I have so many right now too.
Do you? Okay, that's awesome.
Little babies are hatching right now, and I'm actually shipping my first clutch out. It's 6 months old now, so I'm
nice.
So funny, viper geckos.
Are you able to sex the babies yet?
No.
No. Well, whenever if you're keeping any back and you're able to sex the babies, I would like a pair.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Viper geckos are funny, and again, it kind of shows these cyclical trends in the hobby. I had viper geckos 15, 20 years ago.
Oh, you did? Okay, so they're not your first time keeping
them. Viper geckos were one of those things I had when I was doing all my online research. We always do. I'd seen them and went, oh, this is exciting, right? Because I like anything that's small. I do like the idea of things that can be kept easily and well in a small enclosure. Because, I mean, if you're breeding... Pardon?
Desk pets.
Yes. Well, realistically, or just like if you're keeping monitors, you have to have a facility. Like if you're going to have 100 monitors and there's people who do it so freaking well. But for the average person who wants to have 4 or 5 animals, like, I want them to keep their animal well. So going to a smaller animal that you can set up, in a decent sized enclosure and have it be happy its whole life is kind of my goal. So viper geckos got me because of their size. And I think I had about 4 or 5 of them breeding all those years ago. But back then, again, everybody got into it and you couldn't sell the babies.
Because everybody had them.
Everybody got into it all of a sudden. So you were getting nothing for the babies. So then we all got out of it. And I had kept mine for quite a while. When I was getting out of the hobby, I got out of it. So then when I wanted to get back, when I was getting back into the hobby, I was like, I want my viper geckos. I miss them. Like they were such a rewarding species to keep. And I couldn't find them.
They were
I was like,
nowhere.
why can't I get viper geckos? Like these things
Yeah.
used to sell so cheap. Like couldn't find them anywhere. And then I finally sourced a few at a time here and there. And I'm always trying to make sure I source from different places for bloodlines. And
Yeah.
but so then I got my little colony together. And I had people messaging me going, are you producing them? Are you producing them? And like, I have a wait list for viper geckos, which to me is like mind boggling. But in the
And now
same,
you just added me to that wait list.
yes, there we go.
Oh
Line fatty.
yeah, I get to skip the line.
But it's mind boggling, but it's also not because they're such an incredible species that are easy to keep, very handleable. If you set them up like this setup right here behind me, which is an 1818 by 12, and I have a 3-1 in there, like they are happy as.
Hold on, I can zoom us into that.
Yeah, right there. You're like tech savvy.
Yeah, a little bit. No, it's the program, but anyway.
We're living in there, and they're as happy as like pigs and shit. Like that is like such a beautiful setup for them, and it doesn't take that much space on my rack. And like, so it's such a rewarding, easy species to keep.
And how do you have them set up?
I use sand, which is what we did 20 years ago. And when I looked into it, more and more people were saying, because we went again about 15 years ago, we went into this whole no sand for any species, no sand, no species should be on sand, sand is bad, blah, blah, blah. When you do your research on where any animal comes from, that's where you decide if they need sand or not. And viper geckos come from really rocky kind of alcoves that are, kind of dirt and rock. And like, so I have it's a very coarse sand mix. And then I have lots of wood, creating little caves for them, cork for them to go into and hide like they would during the day. I am doing UV mostly because they hide. Okay, now you have to go back out on me because I'm feeling like
Sorry. No, I was keeping it. I was gonna go back out, but I was keeping it because I wanted to ask, because you have a lot of wood structure in there. Do they actually climb? Do
They
they
do.
use it all? Because
They
these
do.
stenos won't really.
No, they do. Do you have UV for the stenos?
I do, yeah. They have the
So,
UV. They'll come out and they'll bask, and they have
yeah.
a little ledge that they'll go up the little ledge to like 3-4 inches off the ground, but they will not climb higher than that.
So what I found with the vipers is they're not fantabulous climbers. Like you can sometimes see them on like sticking to the glass, but then they'll get and then they fall backwards. And it's kind of adorable. But they don't like skinny branches. They want big, thick pieces of wood that almost have like grooves in them.
Okay.
Right. So like aquarium wood more than anything is what I'm using, like more like driftwood kind of stuff that creates more like it kind of replicates like a hill kind of going up, right? And they definitely use that in tubes, cork tubes.
Okay.
I don't know if you've tried that or not, but I find they climb right up the cork tubes.
I haven't tried the cork tubes with them, no.
I'm still on the fence for UV for the vipers, mostly because like I always worry about overexposure. It's a very low one on them, and it's like quite a bit higher than their tallest spot, and they're never basking during the day under it. They'll be on the sand sometimes, so they're probably getting like 3-4% at that point, so it's not a big deal. But I find like during the day they really want to be not on the ground. They want to be a bit higher, but in something. So the cork tubes kind of leaning up on the wood really make it's packed. It's a packed tank.
Yeah. There's always somewhere for them to grab onto or something.
And they all have their little areas, but they're constantly exploring, and like but to be able to keep a species like that in an ideal setup, because they're so small, right? Like they have a really handleable, like friendlier than a leopard gecko, if you ask me.
They're like 2.5 inches, by the way.
Oh yeah, they're tiny.
Yeah,
we should everybody. Sure.
Yeah, we'll put a picture, but just for everybody.
Instagram, there's lots there. But
Jayhayjay.
Jayhayjay on Instagram. But basically, if you like to have something that's easier to keep than a leopard gecko, smaller than a leopard gecko, you are never going to be able to set up a big enough setup to properly house a leopard gecko, right? Like really, a leopard gecko should be in a 24 long for its size, but you can do that, which is the equivalent for how big a viper gecko is. And like I said, they're living their best life. So it's why I like really tame small species, because I really do feel like people can give them the best without giving up too much space, which you can't ask people to do. It's why ball pythons, to me, it's really hard to find an ideal ball python home, because who's going to give them a 6-foot tank? An 8-foot tank really is what some of them should have. And it's not realistic. They don't exist on the market easily or readily available.
They're custom builds. There's no they have to be custom builds.
It's hard to sell a dragon or a ball python. Basically, telling the customer, ideally, you're going to have a custom built enclosure made one day.
Yeah.
Like that's a tough pill to swallow, but it's something people should be aware of because, you know, you're going to be able to keep a sand boa in a 36 long and it's going to be ridiculously happy, and a 24 long and it's going to be very happy. Like, you know, this is something I have on the shelf right now that you can put it in and that, you know, you're giving it the best life possible. So that's kind of where I stand. But yes, the viper geckos are definitely another. I'm
one
sure
of my favorites.
Like, I'm sure I said I was going to make a list of all the species I keep before this, and then I didn't.
I'm sure you forgot as well. I'm sure you forgot some as well. Oh, well, Jayhayjay. See,
Yeah.
I can remember species for you. Like, there's
Fringely frog. So this is
Yes.
another one that we have to clip in the pictures.
Yes.
As we talk
Fringely
about these.
frogs,
Fringely frogs.
Jayhayjay, Craspidopus.
Yeah,
Something like that.
you're better at names than I am.
Something
I'm
like
dyslexic, so I always mix the names up. But yeah, again, back in the day, because you couldn't get dart frogs easily, I used to keep red eyes and whites.
Red-eye tree frogs?
Yep, and whites, and just green tree frogs I had as well, because I've always loved frogs. And yeah, but like the fringely frogs, which weren't called fringely frogs back then, but there was just like, you'd see pictures of them, like, you know, on like different forums. Again, back then we did forums, not Facebook, but like someone would post a picture of something in Europe and you'd just be like, oh my God, can you imagine if that ever hit the hobby? Like, wouldn't that just be an incredible animal to own and to create and to make available and to learn about? So when they first started coming out of Europe, this was what, 5 or 6 years ago, we started to see them. Some of the breeders in Europe were working with them and they were shipping them Canada through different reputable importers. I got 3 of them I ordered, and they were not cheap. There we go. These guys.
Yes.
And again, if you go to my Instagram, you'll see lots of pictures of mine. So they're how are they real is kind of the question, right? When
they're
you see
so cool.
And you're like, oh, that's got to be just on the internet. No, they really are just unreal. I mean,
that's beautiful, and they look like that. Yeah, they're awesome.
Saturated, but yeah. So
yeah, you got 3.
I got 3. And like, you know, most things, they're frogs, they're sensitive. I think the entire import, everyone I spoke to who'd ordered off that, they didn't make it. There was a couple, I think Breeze Exotics was able to keep a couple of theirs from that import that made it. Most of them just didn't make it in. And it's nothing to do with the importer or stuff.
Sorry, who did you say, sorry?
Breeze Exotics, I think, still has some.
Okay, cool. Okay.
If I remember correctly. But yeah, so they just didn't make it. It was incredible to at least even see them, even if they didn't make it. Like, it was such an incredible.
Yeah, just see them in person. Yeah.
So when I found that there was someone in Canada who was basically keeping them and didn't know how they were reproducing, that they were reproducing and had tadpoles, I went like, I'm all in on this.
Yeah, I'll buy as many as I can.
I'll get as many as I can. So I raised them up as tadpoles, which was an incredible experience. And again, having experience raising dirt frog tadpoles also helps. And yeah, now I have my groups that are doing so well. I'm hoping they're sexable soon. But again, this is a species like...
Oh, you don't have them all together? You have them separated into groups?
Well, because I have them from different batches of dart frogs. And now I'm starting to have feelings on which ones are which sex. So now I'm starting to separate them out. It's hard. There's such a... I keep saying these should be the white tree frogs of the like frogs, but they are definitely harder. Yeah, they're definitely a more expert frog than, you know, something like even white tree frogs. I don't think are beginner pets.
I don't think so either. No,
they're not. But anyone who's getting a frog should know that a frog is not a gecko, and it's a bit more work. So I'm really hoping. I would love to try importing again for some more diverse bloodlines and stuff as mine start to section mature out. But this is what I was talking about earlier, like the things that spark your passion and make you want to make things better in the community, right? Like for me, sourcing different bloodlines. I don't want to be just selling a clutch to somebody.
Yeah.
I want to be having, like with my emerald tree skinks, I'm keeping track of who is who and I'm selling them. I'm selling you from 2 different, and I'm hoping to goodness they go 1-1 for you. So you can continue to, you know, and like one of my males is actually going to be sold because I'm getting another male because I've already got his blood, right? So I want to.
Yeah, so you're trading it up now. Yeah.
Like same with my viper geckos. I have a male viper gecko because I have 2 groups right now, and I have 1 male who's not paired with anybody. And my friend was like, "Oh, are you going to sell him?" And I'm like, "No, because a year and a half from now, I'm going to need another unrelated male.
Yeah,
back in." Like,
yeah, that's true.
part of what keeps you going is that like improving and making things better and creating really healthy animals that you feel good about sending out there, that you're representing as what they actually are, right? Like
Creating quality animals, yeah.
Yeah, quality animals that'll
Mhm.
make people happy. Like if an animal doesn't make someone happy, they're not going to keep it. So there's no point in creating something that you think people want to buy that you don't have a passion for. Like it's
Yeah.
what's the point in that? You want to be doing something that's gonna, bring the hobby forward and what you're gonna learn from, and you can contribute what you learned back to the hobby to make keeping better overall.
So we've established that you're keeping many, many different species. But what I want to know now is how are you keeping all these different species with different needs, with different setups? Are you keeping them all in the same room? Are you keeping them in different rooms? Like how do you have it set up?
It's a loaded question.
I know, I'm sorry. Do you want me
Well,
to
no,
rephrase the
it's a
question?
good question. It's a good question. So anybody who's been following me for a while, at my old house, the basement was the reptile room. And when we bought this house here, part of why we bought this house was that it has 1,000 square foot basement that will eventually be my facility.
Yes.
You've seen it. It's phenomenal. It's good.
I
It's
can't wait.
one day.
Mhm.
The main reason why I'm not down there right now is because I want to set it up right from the beginning, and because I have 4 young kids. And so when I went from having the reptiles in the basement where I would go away from the family to work on them, to having them now they're upstairs in the loft, which is connected to our second family room, it changed the dynamic of reptile keeping,
Yes.
where all of a sudden my kids were always there and they were so much more involved. They were like, they can come into this room and they just know everything. And like I've said to you many times, like if I need my kids to feed the crested geckos, because I'm a full-time teacher and I do retail consulting at Critter Jungle, the store we both work at.
Critter Jungle.
Critter
Shout out.
Jungle. It's one of the only places I'll sell my animals. I truly do believe in Critter Jungle. I got involved with them about 3 or 4 years ago, and I really do. They really support a lot of the same ideals that I believe in the hobby. So it's been a wonderful partnership. But when I just really felt like it was wonderful to be able to have my kids feed the crested geckos, right? Like they know how to do it, and I can come home and check and make sure they've done it right. And there's just so many things they're able to do now that do make it easier. So having a little mini army of 4 experts who've been raised basically with this, who have driven, when I talk about picking what you wanted to keep based on your passions, my kids' passions play into that a lot. So, like I wouldn't have snakes if it wasn't for my second daughter. And, and that's just such a wonderful feeling of like experimenting with something and that I would never have delved into. And I have a passion for now too, because of that. And they all have the different things they love. Remember my first tarantula was because of Dell,
I
my
remember that.
second daughter. She sent me to the expo and she was like, when you come back, you better have a tarantula.
I remember that. Yeah.
And now it's
Mhm.
just,
And now Charlie's getting into the axolotls.
yes,
Yeah.
they're all just like in
Yeah.
love with it. And yeah, axolotls, like we're getting an axolotl, and like it's nothing I would ever keep. I wouldn't want an axolotl, but they have proven their ability to research and learn and know the good and the bad and say, no, I want to do that. Like I have Charlie right now who wants the axolotl. She's doing all my fish tank care right now because I also do have a very small smattering of aquatics.
Yeah.
And like she's a month into doing the filter change, cleaning and changes and the siphoning. And I'm like, so can you do it for twice a week for an axolotl? And she's like, I don't enjoy it because these are guppies, but when
If it was an axolotl, yeah.
yes, when I'm tongue feeding food to my axolotl, like, so
Yeah.
that all drives you too, right? That
Mhm.
passion of it. So yeah, so I've ended up keeping the reptile room upstairs in the loft. It's also nice because like I have beautiful views up here, and it's and because it's its own separate, it's actually a bedroom that I'm in right now. So I have separate cooling and separate heating. In Quebec, I live in Quebec now, and it's very strange how like it's different than most of Ontario. You don't do furnaces typically here. Electricity is so cheap, so every room tends to have its own like it's hard to explain. They're like vents and they do heating and cooling. But so you can set the temperature of every room. So it's nice to be able to have temperature controlled area just for this room that I can keep, cooler in the summer, hotter in the winter. I will have to move, and I've been in chats with my wife about this. Like I'm outgrowing the space. You've been here. It's it's getting
You're not
tight.
outgrowing. You've outgrown it.
I've outgrown
Once you
it.
start piling out of the room, you outgrew it.
But the basement was that way too. But I
Yeah.
mean, I also have what's wonderful up here is that I have a bathroom. We have 4 bathrooms in the house, and that bathroom is literally my reptile bathroom. And it's wonderful because I can quarantine animals there. So like when I'm bringing new animals in, I can quarantine them in the shower. Like it's like a glass shower like it's nice. I have a kitchen up here too, which I mean, it's funny having all of this covered space just for all my reptile supplies. Like I can open, and same in the bathroom, I can open a cabinet. It's just a whole shelf of different feeding cup sizes. Like it's wonderful having that setup up here. So I don't know when I'll move down to the basement, but it's going to happen because I am outgrowing it. But I have to set it up properly because I've gotten so accustomed to having the kitchen, the bathroom, and having the closed off space. But it'll happen eventually. So short term, keeping it in this bedroom, it is hard because we're talking about keeping species that need it cool, species that need it hot, and species that need more misting, species that need less misting. We've kind of come into this place in the hobby with automation where I get kind of like I get curmudgeon-y. I get into my old, this was the problem with automation back in the day when we did it this way. People set up everything on their Miss King. And you and I've had this chat before, right? Where we set up everything on their Miss King, and I'm like, well, this one's too dry and this one's too wet. And it's like, yeah, but the Miss King runs this time every day. So one thing for me is starting with the Miss King is runs. And people are always like, what do you mean by runs?
Can you explain that, please? Yeah.
Yes. And I don't know anybody else who's doing this. It's no different than you can have 4 Miss Kings set up and each running to different types of species. For me, I have 1 Miss King set up, and I have off that Miss King, and I'll send you a clip so you can explain this, but off that Miss King, you use the ball valves to turn on and off each run. So a regular Miss King can do 10 nozzles, the advanced can do 20, the other one
it can do 70,
which is the one I have.
Yes.
And actually I don't even have that pump set up right now. I have it set up to my 10 nozzle pump just because I haven't needed to use the 70. And I'm kind of waiting to use the 70 when I do the basement. But realistically, I don't mist more than 10 cages at a time because I don't have more than 10 cages that need the same misting. So realistically, my Miss King is automated, but it needs me. I don't set the timer up on my Miss King.
You're still in the room every time the Miss King.
Still in the room. And I'm not saying you can't automate it and have it come on and off and do a wonderful job. I'm saying I'm an old lady, and this is how I'm going from, spraying, and I just like to have eyes on my animals. Yeah. And so for me, I come in the room twice a day and I turn the Miss King just on to run.
Yeah.
I go through and I turn on and off each. So for example, like over here, I've got everything on this row and the bottom row
is connected on one run.
Because these are all 12, 18s. So realistically, they all need about the same amount of misting. And I'll look through, and there's times where I'll notice, for whatever reason, usually because of pressure, more water will be running, usually to that back corner for some reason. More water will run to that one. So I will disconnect that one from the Miss King and hand mist it for a couple days just to get it's a judgment call that we kind of take out of the hobby when we go to
automation.
And it's something that I actually enjoy. So maybe it's not a judgment on not doing it. It's actually a part of it that really brings me joy, is knowing, all of these little details. The science of it still fascinates me. I'm by no means a scientist, but I find it fascinating. So
yeah, it's something to say for consistency and regularity as well, right? They're not getting regular rainfalls. It's not raining in a pattern in the wild. It's the same thing with like feeding on a schedule. They're eating whenever they can in the wild. They're not eating a schedule. Why are we putting them on? Why are we spraying them on a schedule? Although I do it, but I'm just, it's just something to think about.
Yeah, it's just another way to kind of flip it on its head. And realistically, I can put 2 nozzles in an 18-18-24 and 1 nozzle on a 12-12-18 and say they can miss at the same time. But the airflow in the 12-12-18 or 18-18-24 might be different, where even then it might be too much or not enough. Or, I might have a glass top on that one because it's dart frogs versus ventilation. I have some of my gargs I find have really hard time with shedding. Gargs often end up with toes missing just because they're not, gargs are a bit different than cresties. They don't stick the way cresties do. So their actual feet are built a bit different.
Mhm.
And so gargs typically are most often the ones that end up with toes. Cresties rarely lose toes unless they've really been neglected. So some of my garg tanks, I have half glass on the top.
Just
But
to kind of keep the humidity in more.
yeah, so most of my gargs are actually over on this side, but that means that I can't mist them the same way I'm misting my 12, 12, 18 or my 18, 18, 24 with a screen top. It changes it. So I mostly have them grouped in the room based on misting needs. The main reason for that being is I can set up a run. So like I said, all of these material will go off on run. I'll turn off that ball valve. The mister is still running, but not running anything. And then I turn on the next ball valve, and then it'll do the next section of tanks that have similar misting needs. And even within that, like I said, there's times where I will disconnect a tank from the mist king just because it does. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but sometimes it'll run to one tank more than others based on.
Yeah.
And I would not be surprised if I have I don't even know how many meters of Mist King lining running around this room.
Yeah.
And that's why I love Mist King, because I have wood floors here. It does not fail. My air conditioner leaked and destroyed part of my floor this summer. Not my Mist King. It doesn't do that.
No.
So, even with all of those lining, you get pressure changes and stuff. So I like to still be able to disconnect it and make that judgment call to hand mist that. I actually today was working on putting some of my smaller grow outs for my urodactylides. I grow out the babies in the 8812s, but they're really hard to put on a misting system because they're so small. So now I have enough grow outs of those that I can get a run of 6 of just that size of tank together.
Yeah.
So the misting is kind of the first thing that I decide on when I'm setting up the areas that they're in.
How many runs do you have in total, like roughly?
Oh, I have I'm trying to look over there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 runs.
So you're running your Mist King for like a minute, and in that minute you're running between 7
5
runs.
minutes.
5 minutes, and between that you're running 5 minutes. Okay.
7 runs, yeah.
Okay.
So because like I said, it's a full mist cycle, and you're also getting a stronger mist
that way. Yeah.
because it's only running to so many tanks. We talked about this in the blackout video, our daisy chaining, how it's an industry standard. We're all putting cords into cords into cords. Although today I redid a lot of my electrical, so it's like a thing of beauty.
Less risky.
I sent my wife a picture. I'm like, I won't burn our house down. Yeah. But
for now.
So Mist King kind of is kind of the same thing. You always overrun your mister. Everyone's always nozzles beyond what their nozzles are supposed to be. But if you split them into 2 runs with the ball valves, which are like $4.99 each, you're upping how much power is going into those 5 specific tanks at a time, and then just turning it off and letting it focus on those 5 specific tanks at a time. And the mist, if the second timer is easy. You just press up, it turns on, and when you're done, you press down, it turns off. It's really simple to do. It's taking the idea of automation and just taking one step back from it. If you could have a mister on every tank, or if you could basically have your spray bottle, you didn't have to touch it, and you
would
could
just
watch
tell it where to spray.
Tell it to stop, basically, right? To me, it's the ideal. But again, I know that doesn't work for everybody. But for me, it really is the ideal, and it has allowed me, in some of my tanks, I'm not doing bio balls anymore. I've gone completely away from a drainage layer because I keep everything bioactive. I have none of except for my grow out cresties, I usually keep on Reptile carpet. But even my grow outs for my cresties, I'm slowly moving them over to bioactive because it's better. It's healthier. The plants create a natural humidity. It's better. So for me, when I'm trying to find eggs, the bio balls to me create an issue because it's hard to dig down. You can't get as much substrate. So I've just gone in some of my recent builds, and people are like, what are you doing with a drainage layer? A drainage layer is there for over misting.
Yes. Well, yes. Yeah.
That's what the drainage layer is for. So if I'm not over misting, if there's a natural dry out period that's coming, I have started to have success without using it. So again, and there's no right or wrong way. It's just a different way of thinking in terms of just putting eyes back on it a bit more. And there's things I see every night that I would miss if I wasn't looking at every cage. There's times where I'm like, oh, I think she's laying. I didn't think she was due to lay yet. And
you're seeing that because you're in there all the time.
And then I'm knowing which corner she's in, so I know where to go tomorrow to get those eggs. People are like, how do you find your eggs and these bioactives? Because I'm watching them. Not an evening goes by. And if I'm leaving, obviously, there's times where we go to an expo and stuff, and you have to leave for a few days. You can you can set up a certain amount of automation that works for 3-4 days at a time. But beyond that, I can't be gone for more than 3 or 4 days anyways, because my animals need to be fed. So that's all I can set up a haphazard short term. And realistically, if you're leaving for 2 days and you're cresting, you heavily missed on day one and you use saran wrap over the top, they're not going to dry it anyway. So like back in the day, we would probably mist a few times a week. Sometimes we weren't misting enough, but we were plants alive.
And season changes. It's even in the most humid places, it's not humid all the time. You know, a day or two of less humidity is completely natural sometimes.
And one thing, because I am using electric heat here because I'm in Quebec, one thing that's really interesting is I find in the winter things do dry more just because the heat is drying it out a bit more. So you're having to up your misting. And there's sometimes where I wonder, like, should I just kind of play with that a bit, right? Should I not up the misting to make up for that and just see if that's a natural part that I would actually increase there?
Sort of like a cooling period or a dry period for dart frogs. Or
exactly. But without our eyes on them every day for this stuff, and I'm not saying if you're using an automated system, you don't have your eyes on your animals. That's not true at all.
Yeah.
But when we rely on automation, when we take automation to the maximum that it can do, right down to it just goes off automatically at 7 o'clock, and I don't have to go in the room for 3 days, we miss some of the best parts of the hobby, and we don't even realize it. So that's where, like, I'm not. They could make a system where I wouldn't have to do the runs, and I'd probably still do them just because it's ideal for me. It enriches the hobby for me. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, the runs are a big thing. And then the second thing is definitely heat.
I was going to ask, because you have beardies and things that need heat lamps and heat pads. And,
so
and
I my snakes are racked. When I decided to get into Samboas, I bought ball python racks. So they're big ones. Basically, boas need half the size of ball pythons. Bullshit. I went to good size racks.
The big ones? Okay.
Big ones. My baby vipers I keep racked as well, just because my baby Samboa rack is the same temperature. Okay. So it's perfect. So my snakes are racked, so they're kind of out of the equation. And then kind of where it's evolved is that my high heat animals are kind of mostly here. Okay. So that I can try to mitigate, too much heat going into other cages. So so like my swifts are here. Most of my skinks are on this rack. My beardies, my colony of viper geckos, they're mostly on this rack. And then I also use this rack for animals that like a higher ambient temperature. Right. But not necessarily. So there's some animals that prefer 25 degrees, right? But a heat lamp is very hard to achieve that. So there's some animals that I might have typically put a heat pad on the side that I don't have to do that because
they're so close to where all the heat is.
Where all the heat is. Okay. Another thing I'm an advocate of is having a very zeroed in basking spot. So, and this is one of the things I'm telling people about emerald tree skinks. They don't need to have a big area at 90 degrees, right? Yeah. So when you have the basking spot super duper duper low, and then your heat lamp up here, all of this heat in the middle is dispersing throughout the tank, right? So you're not having as many zones for them to go to because it's getting hot everywhere. So your cool zone is less dialed in. And B, you're just wasting heat and spreading it around the room. So I really do try to build basking areas that are comfortable for them. So again, you see there's so much wood in there. Yeah. Yes, because it feels comfortable for them to get up to that basking area.
And you're creating a gradient now too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You have one little stick that is your basking zone, then they're not going to use it, and then they're not going to get the heat. Whereas like for my dragons, like I don't know if you can see here, like it's a ton of that basking area has so much in it, and they have areas that are like the highest part of the point, the areas that are lowest, and then the heat is right above it. So I can go with a lower wattage bulb because the hottest area is literally right under that light. So I'm not like when people are saying you need a 150 watt bulb for dragons. Well, sure, if you have it 2 feet above the tank, like, but that's not
just to get because everybody creates flat. When it comes to air, they immediately think flat. They don't think they can climb, so they don't create that.
We're trying to get that heat down and coming
down to the bottom.
I'm bringing the landscape up to the heat, which is what nature is. Like you look at dragons, you look at viper geckos, you look at these species that live on rock cliffs, basically, right?
Like they're climbing up the rocks to get
climbing up. They're basking on the rocks, and then at night they're going down and burrowing under. So it's kind of just really trying to be efficient. And again, I'm not saying you can't have a big tank with a 2 foot above 150 watt bulb by all means, but when you have to be efficient with your space and when you have to be efficient with your setups, lower wattage overall is going to put less heat into the room, and having a natural basking area that replicates terrain and gets closer to that heat point can cut down 50 to 100 watts. So it's cheaper, it's safer, and it just helps for keeping animals in a small space.
And there's something to say for us keeping our animals too hot anyway.
Well, that's the other thing too.
Yeah.
Right? It's funny because somebody was asking me the other day, like how many hours should your lights be on? And that's a whole debate that is happening in the hobby now. Like 12 hours on, 12 hours off, 12 months of the year. No. Not really. No. Like not really. And when you're a plant keeper, it's funny because I do plants as well, and we force grow plants because they're plants. Yeah. We will do 13-hour days on plants to get them to grow faster. And then we started to realize that actually some of those plants weren't actually as healthy. They were crashing once they were outside of ideal environments. When someone would buy that plant and put it on their windowsill, the plant was crashing. So like when we're forcing, something onto it, it's not necessarily creating a healthy animal. So trying to replicate, like my lights do go on less time in the winter.
Mine too.
Like I think it's important to replicate that. Like we don't need our animal up eating for 12 hours every single day. Like, I don't know, like I go to bed earlier in the winter too.
No, 100%. Especially here. But
more all winter than I do in the summer. In the summer, I'm go, and then in the winter, it's like catch up on that. So
and gives them a break too.
It does.
Time to sleep.
And some of them
for breeding season
behavior. For some of them, that's what actually stimulates that behavior, right? Like we talk about dry out periods, like in the winter, playing with the fact that it's drier can actually help stimulate behaviors. And crested geckos and stuff, we've gone away from breeding seasons because they'll breed all year because we always keep them in the same conditions
all year.
All year. And it's like, I don't know, like, is that good or is that bad? Like it's something just to think about and play with. So lights are the other big thing. And then just really efficient keeping, I think, is the other thing. Like, I'll give you a clip to show of like what the room looks like.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you can give us a bit of a tour, but okay, that works too. Yeah.
So really just looking at like, what is the minimum size enclosure I feel comfortable keeping my animal in, which for me is usually about 18, 24 for crested geckos and 12, 18 for groats and stuff like that. So for me, like finding bins, like a lot of people have asked me about my front opening bins I use for my crested geckos, like finding bins that work for me and not buying one bin. You find a bin system that works for you that you can do bioactive in that is clear and allows you to open from the front. You buy 15 of those. I made the mistake. They don't make my bin anymore. I can't get it anymore. And
neither could I.
Yes. And then so it's really a matter of like, when you find it, buy lots of it, because having a lot of the same really makes it efficient.
Makes it easier.
It allows me to keep most of my breeders over on that side of the room, which is the coolest side of the room, closest to the air conditioner, which brings me back to independent heating and cooling. And I know that's difficult in houses with furnaces. And I know we talked about this in the blackout episode, having independent heating and cooling for power outages, but it's important even just for day to day. So for me, like I have a floor unit air conditioner that runs in here basically from sometimes end of March, sometimes as early as end of March. It's always installed by April because we start having days. As soon as it goes over 20 degrees outside, I have to have my air conditioner running. There's just too much going in here. And this air conditioner, it's too hot. I have too much running in one room, and this air conditioner is rated for like, I don't know, 8-9 times the space I have in here. And I'm upgrading it next year just because I don't want to be worried. Because there's times where like if it's 40 degrees out, I'll turn my lights off sometimes just because I'm not going to risk it. I get an alert to my phone if it goes over 23 degrees in here, and then I just turn the lights off for the day.
23 degrees. What do you keep the ambient at?
I like to keep the ambient around 21, 22.
Okay.
So as soon as it goes above 23, I get an alert to my phone. And then if I'm not at home, I kill the lights because that's the instant thing I can control. If I am because I can do that for my phone. But if I am at home, I'll come up and I'll see like why it's at that. Adding fans often will help. But yeah, I don't like it to go above 23 degrees in here, just because I am keeping newts, crested geckos. Like those are things that.
Which is another thing you didn't mention, by the way, the newts. But
Oh yeah,
We'll
swimming.
let those slide. We'll
We'll
let
think
those
of more
slide.
species as we go. Yeah.
Yes.
So really
Okay. So,
trying, yeah,
no, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
really trying to keep the similar species together. Make sure I'm keeping them in similar setups so that I can use more of those setups. Like if you see up here, these are my 5-gallon grow outs for crested geckos. You and I said like we found these acrylic
I love
5
them.
gallons years ago, and you and I had gone in on it together.
And we bought everything.
And now we're like, and we didn't buy everything. That was a problem.
We
Remember?
bought a lot of them though.
We bought a lot of them, but we should.
Yeah.
Now we're like kicking ourselves,
Okay, we
going,
should
"Why
have
didn't
bought
we just
more. You're
buy
right.
them
Yeah.
all?" Because
Yeah.
I could have stacked these up. Because I like a lot of breeders.
And they stack, by the way.
They
Yeah.
stack. A lot of breeders will raise crested geckos in groups, which is I honestly think is perfectly fine. I don't like to do that. I like to keep them individually, and
Yeah.
I have like 20 of these stacked. Like,
I like to keep them individually as well, but yeah.
yeah, but so just being able to have the space to keep them the way that you feel comfortable keeping them is nice. So just I wish buying more of the same. It's a racking system. Is what it comes down to. Snake racks have the same bins on them.
Mhm.
So when you go into a reptile room, setting up shelves for the same size is what makes sense, right? If you're setting
And
up,
it looks aesthetically better too.
yeah, like if I'm just gonna do this
Yeah. Like
hatchling setups, right? Like
yeah.
having the same size hatchling setups as opposed to having 10 different sizes of hatchling setups allows me to keep 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15, 16 crested gecko babies on one little tiny shelf there. Like,
Yeah.
so just trying to automate kind of what you're keeping them in so that it's a lot of the same. You can keep it in one area of the room, and then independent heating and cooling is really key so that in the winter, if it's too cold, you can up it with a space heater with a closed door is key, especially most reptile keepers or have other animals in the house. So it's usually a good idea to be able to close up your reptile room. The amount of if you keep reptiles get out. It happens. If you're keeping a lot of it, it's going to happen. So I do think it's nice if you can close the door and be able to just make it a controlled climate and always know that snake's going to be in here somewhere.
I'll get to it at some point.
I'll get to it at some point. I'll find it. Usually my daughter finds it. But and then
Yes.
having the heating and cooling in that area, and then just really focusing your heat on that terrain so that you're not just heating your whole room up.
Okay, so a common thing that we're hearing very frequently now, a lot of people are talking about it. It's becoming more common in the hobby is burnout or getting overwhelmed. And with keeping so many of these animals and so many different animals as well, how are you not burning out or getting overwhelmed with your collection?
It's important. It's a really important thing to be talking about, I think, in the hobby. And I think it's almost like a shameful thing for a lot of people that people don't want to talk about it. And I can say, like, I left the hobby 15 years ago and only kept a couple things for many years after that. And part of why I did that was because I wanted to travel. I wanted to have kids.
Yeah.
I didn't want to let animals be neglected while I was doing all those parts of my life. So I think we have to look at burnout separate from taking a break from the hobby. And we need to mitigate how we build up our collection so that if we do take a break from the hobby, we can foresee it and it doesn't become a huge stressful thing to do. So personally, when I got out of the hobby, I knew who was taking my geckos. It was a slow process of, tapering down.
Getting the rehoming, yeah.
And then, and like I said, and I kept a few things for many years after that. For me personally, getting back in this time around, it was a slow build. Buying a reptile is a unique high. It's hard. I mean, anyone watching this will know it, or listening to this will know it because they're in it.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to explain what buying a reptile feels like. It's not like buying a pair of shoes. It's nothing like that because you're excited to learn about it and you're excited to like.
You're excited about more than just owning it. You're excited about what you can do with it, what it can offer you, what you're gonna learn, what everything, how long,
And like I said earlier, I don't think we should be afraid to experiment with species. I don't think we should be afraid to say, you know what, I'll try samboas. I don't like snakes. And maybe I wouldn't have liked samboas. I bought one to get started. And if I had decided, no, I don't like it, and decided to resell it to somebody who's into samboas or wants a pet samboa, that's okay. And I think we have to get into that as we're really looking at like the Instagram generation, the YouTube generation, where it's like, I need content. I need to buy this. I need to make a video about it. and I don't want to get rid of it because then someone might ask me what happened to it. I think it's important that we talk about the fact that it's good to try something new because then you might fall in love with it and change how the hobby views that species.
But don't buy an animal to make content.
But don't buy an animal. No, you shouldn't. Exactly. And you have to always have your buying in check. You have to ask, why am I buying this? If I bought everything I wanted to buy, I would be overwhelmed.
And broke.
Well, yeah, exactly. We're always broke as reptile keepers.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah.
But you'd be, honestly, more so than being in debt would be it's the feeling of being overwhelmed is the worst feeling in this hobby, because the thing that brings you joy then makes you feel like shit. And that's the worst, when the thing that brings you joy suddenly causes you anxiety and shame and fear. That's not good. And I think a lot of people start buying and buying and buying because they think that's what reptile keeping is. We have projected this image of reptile keeping is having a reptile room.
Yeah, it's how big a collection you can be. It's people think that the bigger the collection, the better the keeper. It's looked at the wrong way. You're right.
There's often times where I will bring a new species in, like even you're asking, I don't want to talk about it yet. Like I don't want to show that. And it's the same in the plant industry. And I know, I mean, I was a very big collector. I'm not as collecting the way I was before, but it was just, what's the next plant you have? What's, oh, this is a new plant. I have to have it or I'm not good enough. And then just watering all the plants makes you miserable. Like, and then you lose a plant.
You have too many and you're like, I'm just keeping this for the image, not because I love it.
And then you lose a plant that you paid money for and you feel like shit. But that's plants.
Yeah.
If you let an animal die, that's animal cruelty.
That's a whole other story. Yeah, 100%.
You being overwhelmed, that's you making bad decisions and you have to change something. So I think we have to really support people trying new things and then changing their mind and going, this thing doesn't bring me joy, and reselling. And because that's reselling is part of the industry. We are importing, we are producing, we're breeding to sell. And we are, like I said, like I'll sell one of my males because I'm replacing with another male. I don't have to keep him forever. He can now be a part of somebody else's projects, or he can be an incredible pet for somebody, right? All of my crested gecko breeders have completely turned over in the last little while, just because I think it's important to really be focused on quality animals when you're producing crested geckos. So that's okay. There's no pride in but I keep them all in the end.
No, they're not all. I agree.
No,
and also, if you're keeping them all and you're not keeping them all to the best of your abilities, then why keep them at all? Yeah, 100%.
So I think it's kind of twofold. I think we really need to be dismantling this idea of needing to own all the things to be worthy in this hobby.
Yes.
And I think we also need to be promoting the idea of don't be afraid to try a species and then decide it's not for you. You do not need to then keep that species. Because
you're not evil if you rehome.
No, you're not. Or rehome. We don't even want to say resell.
Yeah, rehome.
It's okay to sell it. This industry is growing all the time. People are constantly looking for things
and coming into the industry and joining.
Yes, when you purchase an animal, you need to put thought into it. And again, that goes back to not trying to have this huge collection. When I'm buying something, I'm looking into it. I'm trying to make a decision on what I want for me. And then I'm looking at the space I have. If I want to bring in another Chewy, I should move out one of my breeders that I have enough of the bloodlines for first. Or I'm deciding, no, I have space for this and I'm taking them all on, but I have to be conscious of that decision, right? Whereas opposed to just add it to the rack, add it to the rack, add it to the rack. And then for a lot of the keepers I see experiencing burnout, all of a sudden either something in their life changes or they just wake up one day and they're like, this is 3 hours a day of work. And it compounds.
Yeah, and they're not happy anymore.
Or this is costing me too much, because that's the flip side of it too. A cricket bill, when you start taking on anything that doesn't just eat, even Rapashi. I go through the giant jug of Rapashi almost every week.
Whereas when we have one crested gecko, that small bottle of Rapashi is lasting you months. And
exactly.
It definitely makes a difference. You're right.
It makes a difference. So you really have to be conscious of this stuff, and the joy of buying something is not worth the angst of feeling overwhelmed in your reptile room. So for me personally, I can tell you what is in every single, and you know how many containers and cages are in this room. I can tell you what is in every single thing. And if you ask me, why is it still here? I can tell you.
Yeah.
And when I can't say, why is it still here? then I
Yeah,
sell it and I
it's time
find
to
the
go
right
to
home
home.
who wants it to have. And I've done that. Like I said, I had 20 pieces of dart frogs and I don't anymore. And that's okay. The ones that are here because they're still bringing me joy. And the other ones are in other people's breeding projects doing wonderful things that I didn't have. There we go. I didn't I didn't have the passion to do anymore, right? And you might hit a point where very few breeders are breeding only what they bred from the very first day.
Oh, of course. Yeah,
It
you
doesn't
gotta.
work that way.
Breeding itself is a challenge, and you know, it's if you've mastered the challenge and you're doing it with your eyes closed, then either you're doing it for money,
Yeah.
and there's not always money in it, and the
Mhm.
other reason is you're doing it because you truly love it. But if you're doing it because you truly love it, then you want to advance and you want to find the next challenge and you want to,
Yeah.
yeah,
We have to be moving forward. Once you become stagnant, then you become burnt out. And then when you're looking around yourself going, I can't do the things I want to do because of this space. And I see people who get out completely. And sometimes I'm sad because I'm like, maybe like I even for myself, if I'd cut back a little bit, even 15 years ago, instead of getting completely out of it, would I have been happier? Maybe, right? Like it
yeah,
was too big for me for all the things I wanted to do. And sometimes I'm like, I wish I'd continued breeding just a couple during that time. But when you get so big, it's hard, right? It's hard to just cut back a little bit.
yeah.
And back then we did not have this Instagram culture, this YouTube culture of content drives everything. People are buying things thinking about the reel, thinking about the TikTok, thinking about the YouTube pod.
Don't buy animals to make content. I'll say it again. Please don't buy animals to make content.
You don't have to like
Yeah.
go to an expo, find an animal you love, and you can make content about it without owning it. Like
Exactly. You really can. Yeah,
and I
100%.
say that for scapes too, because it's funny because people are always like, all these incredible scapes you see on YouTube, and it's like, how many of those scapes still exist a year from that build? That's what I wonder sometimes with some of these scapes. When you're creating a scape for content versus when you're creating a scape for an animal specifically to live in your house, it's two different things. And I've done both.
Yeah,
So,
100%.
just thinking about it actually being in your house and you finding joy from it, and then also knowing, no, this isn't bringing me joy. And the next step is rehoming it and finding what does bring you joy.
Since the expo's in a couple of days, I figured we might as well talk about some expo tips and tricks, some things we do at the expo. You know,
Mhm.
highlight some of the things that'll be happening in the expo in a couple of weeks, or since when you'll be hearing this next week.
Oh my God, I can't wait.
Yeah, no, I'm too excited. It's like the only thing we've been talking about.
Yeah,
Um,
we live for these. Like
we really, really do. We wait all year, and the reptile expos are awesome.
they
The
are
monthly reptile expos are awesome, but the CRBE is going to be
it's different
something
animals.
else. It really is. If anybody hasn't had a chance to look, if you're in Canada and you're planning to come and you
Yeah.
haven't had a chance to look at the floor plan, please do. Um, it's going to be so exciting. But that's not what we're here for. Jen, let me ask you this: You're going. We live in Ottawa.
Yes.
The expos rarely ever happen in Ottawa. They haven't happened in Ottawa in like 3 years.
Years.
So we drive up to Toronto. So I'm asking you, what are some things that you take with you before you go to the expo so that you're ready for the drive back when you have the animals that you purchased at the expo? And then like what are some things that you do to make sure that they're staying safe in the
Mhm.
journey? And like this time we're staying there for multiple days. And if you happen to buy an animal on day one, what are you gonna do to keep it safe while we're there? That kind of thing.
So leading up to the expo, I'm sourcing. That is like most of my purchasing typically will happen around the expos
I
because
told
that's
you she's already been buying animals. I'm not
yes,
lying.
not compulsively. Like I'm
No,
talking
no, of
about
course.
that I've been planning on for years. Like I've been like it's like I said, like the friendly frogs was 10 years in the making before I got them. Like
Yeah.
so I'm reaching out to people. You're looking in the community for who has what because not we don't actually we have morph market, but in Canada it's not what it is in the US. If you're watching from the US,
Oh,
I'm like I can't it's starting to take off, but it's not like that. So for us, most of it's done through Facebook and Instagram and just word of
mhm.
mouth. So um and I'm terrible. I'm so bad for listing my own animals also. Like if I have something you're looking for, you're better off to contact me through Instagram. That's where I do most of my sales and then it's mostly word of mouth in
And
the
I will jump in and say that we will also be able to bring animals up from Ottawa with us to Toronto. And Jen has a lot of animals.
I
So
do.
we'll say this afterwards. But if you are interested, message Jen. get yourself
So
ready.
do you.
And well, yeah, I also have.
Are you bringing stuff to sell? Like
I'm bringing frogs.
pre-sales,
I'm
I mean?
bringing stuff
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. So, yeah,
It's
if people are
it's
looking for
not just
animals.
vending at the show. Like, yes, the vendors are going to have really cool things, but it's also about just having everybody in the same city for a few days so that you can kind of figure out who has what, and then you're able to kind of because
Community
something
network trade, sell, buy.
you're
Like,
not going to see emerald tree skinks on a table at
no,
the expo.
no.
You're not going to see the morphs of samboas I'm looking for, the type of snake I'm looking for on a table. I mean,
Yeah.
if I do, I'll buy it. But like,
Yeah.
those were the impulse buys will come in. But like realistically, most of what if you're looking for specific things, you usually have to contact ahead of time and pre-order. When I first got my viper geckos, like I remember walking around the show with it. And everyone's like, "Where did you find those?" And I'm like, "Well, they weren't on a table. Like it was something
Yeah. I
set up
bought
ahead
them
of
in advance and I picked them up here.
and especially when you get into like I don't want to say high end animals because I hate categorizing and like eluding, but like certain animals,
More advanced animals.
yeah, species, rarer species, people aren't necessarily going to bring and put on a table because the chances of it selling is lower. It has to be someone looking for that species. And so they might not have it on a table. And you might talk to that vendor at the show and they're like, I have that, but it's back in BC because I didn't know somebody wanted to buy
I
it.
wanted to bring it. Yeah.
And then you're stuck shipping. And we do have shipping options now in Canada, but nothing is as good as someone handing it to you and not having to go through FedEx. So realistically, it's just you save yourself,
especially with what's happening with FedEx right now.
especially with what happened with FedEx. So I have people that I would have shipped animals to that right now I just prefer just to if we're going to see each other in a few weeks, let's just do the handoff there. It saves you money, it saves stress of my animal, it's just nicer. So yeah, so contacting people, finding out who breeds, what you're looking for, and doing all that legwork. It makes the purchase more fun because it spreads it out anyway. Yeah. And it prevents the impulse buys that you might regret later. It prevents you showing up at the show and going, I wanted to buy something and I didn't find anything that piqued my interest, so this is good enough. Like,
yeah, which it's sad to say, but people do it.
Yeah, and typically, and again, I have done it. We've all done it, and then you have to like resell to the person who did want that animal. But it's just you want to prevent that. You want to be able to buy things that are going to bring you joy. So reaching out to the breeders ahead of time is really important, and then traveling. So I mean, there's breeders coming from out west, from out east. Like, people have to deli cup things for the show.
Animals are already in the deli cups for a day or two at this point already. Yes,
exactly. And if you're going, I know a lot of people going for the full 2 days and staying overnight like we are. Like, so like I'm bringing bins for everything I know I've purchased, not the permanent homes, but bins that are large enough for them to be comfortable in for a couple of days so that I can enjoy myself and not be stressed out about that animal sitting back at a hotel. Like heat pads, I bring low wattage heat pads. Because again, I don't want to set up an animal in a bin with 100 degrees. If it needs 100 degrees, I don't want to start bringing all kinds of thermostats and stuff. So I love those like 4 to 8 watt heat pads because they're a very consistent, like lower temperature, but it gives them some belly heat for a couple of days in a bin. And then extra bins for something that might pop up. There's species I'm looking for that if I see at the show, I'm going to buy that I don't want to have stuck in a deli cup for 2 days while I'm there. And also, if you do pick up something you didn't have something for, run out to the dollar store and grab a bin. Like, not being afraid to find something to avoid it staying in that deli cup for 2 days. Like, we get a lot of flack in this hobby for how expos are run. We get a lot of bad press for the fact that these animals are in little deli cups, but those deli cups are meant to be for a couple of hours. Most of these breeders coming are showing up with bins and then cupping them and then going back to bins. Like, that's how we do this safely and for the animals comfortable. So just trying to, as a keeper, also trying to reproduce that so that it's comfortable and so you can enjoy yourself. So that's huge. And we've said this in other episodes, styrofoam containers. Yes. Like, there's a reason people are like, why are there no reptile shows in July? It's hot.
It's too hot. Nothing will.
And yes, you can definitely safely transport animals in July, but the majority of people won't. And so it's too much risk. So, but even in September, it can be hot. Like, so having coolers, having heat packs and cool packs. So you've got both options. If for some reason it's -5 that day, you can use a heat pack to keep the cooler warmer. And if some reason it's 35, because we live in Canada, it could be either.
Yeah, it's true. It could be 5 degrees in the morning and 35 in the evening.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Having cool packs they're easy to get and you crack them open and they run for 12 to 72 hours so that you can keep it. Like, we're planning our car ride up and we're just like, okay, where's the cooler gonna go?
Like, yeah, 100%. And you know what, another thing I'll add to that list also, And something actually that I learned from you is wrapping paper and things to kind of keep the deli cups or whatever. Once you put the animal in the styrofoam box, you don't want them to be bouncing around either. So you kind of want them to stay in place.
Painter's tape.
Painter's tape is another good one.
Painter's tape, when you're if you've shipped animals, you tape down. Painter's tape is great because it doesn't get stuck to things. It comes off easily afterwards, but you just tape the deli cups down. So same idea when you're driving.
Remind me
Painter's
to get painter's tape for this
I
one.
will bring some, don't worry.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
Painter's tape to be able to hold them down. And a 1-day show is different than a 2 or 3 day show. Like
Mhm.
this is as the hobby's advancing in Canada, we can start to have these kind of shows, like be prepared for, there's different talks on different days and such. So you want to be there for the whole, like we'll be there opening to close. They'll be dragging our asses out of there. So, but I want to be able to purchase.
I can guarantee it. They will be dragging me out there.
And I want to be able to have my animals safe, that I'm not worried about them when I'm going back that second day. So really ways to transport them, coolers, and coolers are not just for cold or just for hot, they're for both. Having ways to control the temperature in those coolers and having extra just shoebox size bins is going to be better for a leopard gecko you decided to pick up last minute than leaving it in a deli cup I never travel anywhere without bins. Like my wife is always complaining because the back of my car always has different bins. There's almost always a heat pad back there. There's almost always a cooler because I source things. So I might be in Hamilton and find a store I didn't know about and source something that I knew somebody was looking for.
Just pick it up on the spot and bring it back.
But that animal's like, I picked up a blue tongue skink for somebody in Peterborough a couple weeks ago, and it's like I had something with me to comfortably house that blue tongue skink for that time.
Keep it warm and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, like so just trying to get rid of some of that stigma in the hobby that we just put these things in little tiny boxes and so we can enjoy them, like, and so that they're ours. Like, no, the animal care is important. And yes, you're going to be walking around the show with your deli cups, and there's something about holding your new animal as you walk around the show. But, once you get back to your hotel, setting them up in something short term so that they're comfortable, I think is really important. And we're also transporting animals with us. So we'll be setting, I know for me, I have people meeting me on the first day when I get there because they want to get their animal right away before the show because we're going up on the Friday. So, maybe even trying to get those purchases done ahead of time so that once you're at the show, that's already said and done. And you don't have one more animal that you have to figure out after the show.
100%. And I know you already talked about like buying the animals ahead of time and sourcing them ahead of time, but is there something that you're looking for at the expo?
Always. There's always things. There's so many. There's things that you don't always know what you're looking for. There's certain categories of animals. There's scorpions, I'm sure, that I would love to own that I don't know about yet. And that's why these expos are amazing because you can go over to a booth and chat with somebody and be like, yep, this fits my bill and I want to try this. Like there's new things in the hobby all the time and nobody knows everything. So definitely, I'm looking for, like I said, certain types of snakes that I might be willing to branch out into. I'm really interested in skinks right now. I definitely would like to. I've got my emeralds set up. My the olive tree skinks are also something I'm really enjoying.
I saw black ones the other day, all black.
Yes. So I've seen a few pictures, but apparently they're very skittish.
Okay, we might have been looking at the same thing because that's also what they
But that's something that if I saw on a table because I'm trying to learn more about skinks and get more information out there, I might
pick them up.
And it might not be the species for me, or it might, incite a passion that's gonna now make those available captive bred. So that's the kind of thing that always looking. But again, just not going into that show with the idea of I have to buy something. You can go to these shows and learn and just and plan for a year from now. Talk to people who are keeping things that aren't even available yet and be like, this is something I'm going to want to get into. And it's expensive. It's an expensive hobby. The more you bring in, the more you have to produce, which is a really scary kind of place to get into because your cricket bill goes up, your heating bill goes up, your supply bill goes up. So you start feeling this pressure to produce. So just also keeping in mind what you bring home and what it costs. And, you can want something and not need to get it right now. If something's out there, realistically, people are going to start working with it. If it's, you know what I mean?
If you don't buy it, somebody else will. And hopefully we'll be working and breeding.
And we'll hopefully be working and breeding with it. And there's always going to be a market. I know people talk about certain animals crashing, the market crashing. I've watched this so many times.
It'll never happen.
It'll never happen. I've watched crest. I said viper geckos, you couldn't sell them, and now they're impossible to get. We were talking about Santa Isabella dart frogs, how all
Yeah,
of a
they
sudden
were everywhere, and then now they're nowhere. And
now they're nowhere. Like, and so, you know, it's everything's cyclical. You can't like start freaking out because something isn't available right now. Like, it's just a matter of taking your time and waiting and not impulse buying something, but also not letting something pass up that you know you're ready for and that you want and that you have the setup for. And, you know, but we all have those. We all have those things. But like you, there was one of the one species of dart frogs you walked away from at a show like 5 years ago.
do you know what it was? Do you remember what it was?
Colombians?
No,
What was it?
it's the Ancas.
It was the Ancas. It was the Ancas because I told you these
You
are
did tell me.
to come
Yeah.
out.
Yeah,
And
so
you
that's
were
funny. So they were an endangered species. They were barely seen anywhere. I can't even remember what booth they were on, but you pointed them out, and I was like, I love them. They're beautiful. And then I decided against doing it. And I think it's been 4 years now. Has
Yeah.
it been 4 years?
Oh,
I'm happy
yeah.
to report I finally have Ancas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it all
Yeah.
happens, like, and you
Yeah.
kick yourself about that, and then it just
And I also got them more expensive than they were at that booth that day. So
that's hilarious.
yeah.
That is
So
hilarious.
I
No,
do have hundreds of them now, though.
Yeah. I have them
So,
too. So
yeah. They're awesome. They're beautiful.
yeah, they're wonderful frogs.
Yeah.
But if anybody wants to pick some up at the expo,
If anybody wants to pick some up at the expo, let us
Yes.
know. Yes.
Body does have incredible frogs. But yeah, so it's just a matter of, you know, not letting things pass up, but also being able to, you know, check yourself and not make impulse buys. It's so hard at an expo because it's like it is impulsive. It's like if I walk away, someone else is gonna buy it.
Yeah,
And
and yeah, you don't even have just like, oh, I can think about it for a few hours, because you could walk away and somebody's walking up to the booth in 2-3 minutes, and
I decided to breed
Stop.
lychees because of an impulse buy at an expo.
right.
And then when I don't want to breed lychees, what am I doing? Like,
Yeah, after like 6 months later, even. Yeah,
I was
100%.
like, wait a second. But you know,
100%.
we all do it, but trying to limit that as much as possible, I think, is key.
Other than buying animals, what's one other thing that you're excited about for the expo?
The people.
The people.
The people.
Yeah.
The community. And again, we mentioned this in the Blackout episode. This community is incredible. There's people I met 20 years ago that aren't in the hobby anymore that I'm still in contact with. Like, it's
Yes.
and like even like these big breeders that you see, like the majority of them still want to chat. Like,
Yeah,
the
they're down to earth people that want to talk. 100%.
There's
Yeah.
people I talk with, breeders I talk with on Instagram all the time, and it's like to see them in person.
I was
And
gonna say that's another thing. People you've never met before that you're chatting with daily, and then
Yeah.
suddenly you're finally getting to meet them.
like being able to just like sit there and be excited about our silly little thing that brings us joy together, and like just geek out over these things and find out what projects they have on the go. There's stuff that I don't talk about, you know, with everybody. You know, I have
online, but just exactly.
I have my spider people, and I have my scorpion people, and I have my gecko people, my snake people, and it's exciting to just get with those people and have those conversations. And like we're going to be staying with a group of people. Like, it's going to be fun watching what they're excited about, not just what they buy, but like what they find at a table. Because you can go by the same table 3 times
and not see something.
You miss it.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then they bring you back and go, look at this. And like, sometimes just seeing it on the table is all I needed. I didn't need to own that animal. I needed to say, I've seen that animal. That's what I like about
in
being
person. Yes.
Yeah, I like being at the store because you get to work with a species that you don't necessarily want to keep, but now you've added that experience. So being able to ask, how is this animal kept? And like, you know, it just helps you when you're talking to someone else later on who's interested in an animal. Oh, I know a breeder for it. And
yes, exactly. Yeah.
gathering those contacts, those resources. And again, you can have one leopard gecko and just enjoy being there without ever planning to have another. Like, it's just, it's such a great atmosphere. So the people are, to me, what I am most excited about. Just hanging with the people who love the same thing I love, or different things I love, and just being able to chat about it. If not, I'm not even as excited about my purchases as I am about the people. Just the experience with them. It's everything. It's what makes any hobby. It really usually comes down to the people.
Yeah. You know, it's something Zoe said after the last expo. It was her first expo that we took her up with us to.
Oh yeah.
And she was like, it was crazy being in a room where we're no longer the weird people for liking reptiles. Now everybody in the room likes reptiles. So it's like we're normal people now.
When my wife comes, she'll often just hold my purchases and stand in the middle and follow me. and
Yeah.
like she's just not. It's not her thing.
Yeah.
It's like
Oh,
nothing.
I'm not the normal one now.
Yeah, she's the weird person in the room. Like you're either it's your passion or it's not. So yeah, and you have to. Everybody's a different person at the expo. Like
Mhm.
like
Oh yeah.
Expo Jen is different. I mean,
Yes.
regular Jen's already a lot, but Expo Jen is like times a million. Like
You can't catch Jen at the expo. You turn around and she's already been at 4 tables and
God,
back.
God, and come look at this, come look at this. Oh my God, I just found so and so, and like,
it's true. It's
it's
important.
it's like an amusement park. You're running from ride to ride, and you're just on this high, and it's joy. It's joy, and it doesn't have to be about the purchase. It's just joy being there. What about you?
I love it. I can't wait. Like everything, of course, the people as well. But everything, the talks. There's gonna be an aquascaping competition that I want to watch. There's a bird section. I want to see some parrots. Like there's just so much. I'm so excited for it.
Because
And,
this is
like, but
combined.
the people is the big thing for me as well.
The pet
This is
expo combined, right?
It is the pet expo. It's the aquatic expo. There's even a tropical plant
So
section.
that I am also very excited about.
I figured you would be.
I also like my mammals, which we didn't talk
Yes.
about, but I keep mammals. I breed degus, and
There is a small animal village.
I know. And there's a few colors of degu, which are really hard to get right now. So secretly, I'm kind of hoping there might be degus there, but who knows? But
We're gonna find you a pied degu there.
There we go. I have one.
You have a pied degu already?
I would, but I really.
Oh, I was completely joking there. Okay, that's hilarious.
I really like a black degu or a sand
Okay.
degu. If anybody sees it, find me and pull me over.
Okay, done.
And there's going to be a lot of talks, right?
There is going to be a lot of talks. There's going to be the Dave Kaufman Ball Python movie is going to be playing there. There's going to be there's the CRBE Lounge. If anybody's interested in music, like reptile keepers that play music will be playing there. It's just going to be so much. There's so much packed into 2 days. I cannot wait.
I cannot wait. It's going to be so good.
Please come find us. Come say hi.
Or message us on Instagram. Like again, on Instagram, Jayhayjay. Message me and let me know you're going to be there, and we can just meet and say hi. Like I love meeting people that I chat with all the time, and finally actually get to see what you look like. And
exactly, I usually end the episodes by saying, tell us where they can find you. But I'm going to take it from you this time. Don't find her. Come find her at the expo.
Yeah.
And Jayhayjay on Instagram, but come find her at the expo.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere else they can find you? Actually, just so we don't leave any links untouched.
Instagram. I have my TikTok and my YouTube. Same thing, Jayhayjay, but I don't produce there as much. I spend most of my time on Instagram because it's where people know where I am, and like I said, it's where I do most of my sales and such.
And expos.
And expos. I'm here in Ottawa at Critter Jungle. Like
I'm here in Ottawa at Critter Jungle.
I do retail consulting there, so I'm there a lot. So I have lots of people that will try to see when I'm going to be there, and we meet at the store. And again, it's lovely to meet locals there. So yeah, absolutely. That's where you can find me, or maybe here again. Who knows? Maybe we'll do another episode.
Definitely. We already have so much planned, so much more to talk about. We barely scratched the surface of Jenn's keeping, so you'll definitely be seeing her again. But I am going to wrap this episode up because I want you all to go look at websites and vendors for the expo. But no, seriously, thank you very, very much, Jenn, for coming on and for giving us all that very useful information. We'll start planning the next episode very soon.
Yes.
And Jayhayjay on Instagram. Go give her a follow. Go get your expo ticket. Follow me on Instagram as well, Daffy's Reptiles and Daffy's Roundtable for the podcast. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you at the expo.
Bye.